Do we have a quorum? There's Joe. I'm saying Burgess there. Well, I was trying to make sure we had a quorum, you know.
I vote either way.
Whitman around.
I mean,
I was doing the same thing, Mr. Hinton. I was taking a head count. We have. Good morning. I want to welcome everybody here. I was taking a head count. It looks like there's more of you here, obviously, than us. We're trying to make sure we had a quorum today. But we have some of our board members drifting in. I know that we will be missing two of our board members today, Mr. Hall as well as Ms. Phillips. But we welcome everybody here today. I want to remind everybody that, as usual, we are live via internet, so every word and thought will be recorded today, but we welcome you here. I'm looking at my announcements, and I have not been told of any new presidents or chancellors that are here, but if I've missed them, are there any new presidents or chancellors in the audience today? Well, we did a good job then. So, to get started, I'd like to move to the section on approval of minutes. And today we have 3 sets of minutes to approve for our board members. Each of our board members should have been provided with a copy of our October board minutes, also our minutes on the strategic planning meeting in November, as well as our special called board meeting in December. Could I have a motion for approval of those 3 sets of minutes?
So moved.
Dr. Golden, second by Ms. Mendoza. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All is opposed by the same sign. The motion passes. Next is the consent calendar, which everybody has been provided with before you came in. As we have noted before, the consent calendar normally involves what we consider to be non-controversial items. A lot of times these are rules which have been posted for comment. But at the same time, we want to give any of our board members the opportunity to ask that any items be either added or removed from the consent calendar. Are there any of those items from our board members? Therefore, can I have a motion approving those items on the consent calendar? Mr. Hinton, a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Mendoza. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed by the same sign.
And I'd like to be shown as abstaining.
Okay. Showing Mr. Heldenfeld as abstaining, please. The next item is Agenda Item 4, which is our major policy discussion. And this is, I'm really looking forward to this presentation today, because this presentation, I'd ask our presenters to make their way to the head table. This discussion is going to be looking potentially at funding community colleges based on what are called momentum points and milestones. Our board has had the opportunity to hear a lot about momentum and milestone points in several presentations, and we thought it would be a great opportunity to bring some of the experts in to hear about that. As the audience and our board remembers, in our last legislative session, the coordinating board made a recommendation to move formula funded to completed hours versus on the 12th enrollment day. And this was for community colleges as well as for the general academics. Since that time, we have been doing work with Susan Brown and people around the country and learning a little bit more about milestones and momentum points. And so today is a great opportunity for us to hear about that, especially as the Formula Advisory Committee begins to develop their recommendations for the Commissioner, which I think will be coming up at our next board meeting. And we wanted to make sure that we got that in front of the board to hear several perspectives. Today we are honored to have Susan Brown, our own Susan Brown, here today. And we are also honored to have Dr. Jeremy Offenstein here, who's a research specialist for the Institute of Public higher education leadership and policy, and I think also a research on a study called The Steps to Success, which was analyzing milestone achievements. And then also I claim as our own Richard Rhodes from El Paso Community College. Richard has done great work for us. He also chairs the Community College Advisory Committee. We welcome each of you here today, and we look forward to your presentation.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to talk just very briefly about what we're going to do. Jeremy is going to start out by giving some background on what momentum points are in total. Then Richard is going to talk about the formula recommendation, and then I'll kind of summarize with what some of the other states are doing and what we're looking at internally and talking with the commissioner about for our recommendation. So go ahead, Jeremy.
Good morning. Okay, so today I'm going to talk briefly about the concept of milestones, and then I'm going to give an overview of our report, Steps to Success, which I think you have a copy of. Okay, so in general, milestones are intermediate student outcomes. The idea is to get beyond standard items looked at for student outcomes, such as retention or graduation rates. The language around this idea varies a lot. They're called milestones, they're called momentum points, they're called achievement points. But the concept is generally similar. There is some mixing of achievements, such as earning 30 credits, and other factors that include a time dimension, such as accumulating 24 credits in the first year. Some of the key uses for milestones are identifying where student progress stalls on the path to completion. You can disaggregate by different student groups to see how each group is doing. You can dig deeper using the data to find solutions to improve completion. And you can highlight achievement short of completion and use milestone achievement in funding models. So the key thing is there are multiple uses for these beyond funding as well. Okay, so to kind of put some clarity into the literature and kind of conceptualize things a bit, we included two components. The first is milestones, which are really to better understand the problem of student completion. And these are intermediate educational achievements that student reach along the path to degree completion. And then the second component are success indicators. And this is to help point toward solutions more. These are academic patterns that predict the likelihood of completing other milestones and ultimately completion. And we applied this framework to a cohort of students in the California Community College system, and they were tracked for 7 years. This is just a kind of a snapshot of the kind of conceptually the things we were thinking about when we were thinking about milestones and success indicators. As you can see, the milestone includes things like earning 1 year of college level credits. In comparison, remediation on a success indicator for remediation would be begin coursework in the first term. We were not able to look at all of these things in a report because the system doesn't have all the data we needed to do that on remediation in particular. This slide kind of shows how you can actually use these to identify where student progress is stalling. As you can see, there's a lower retention in the second year than in the first term, so some students are being lost at that point. Many students are lost between accumulating 12 and 30 credits. And then some students who earn 30 credits do not end up completing a degree, certificate, or transferring. Additionally, this slide illustrates that the number of sub-baccalaureate awards awarded is pretty small. Additionally, this slide here will show you how disaggregating by groups can show different patterns in completion. As you can see, the Black and Hispanic students, for example, have about the same completion rate, and yet the accumulation of 12 and 30 credits is higher for Hispanic students. So this shows that students are kind of getting lost at different points along the pathway. So when we looked at the data, we validated our success indicators and that they predicted completion. And they're listed in the appendix on page 17, but as an example, students who completed college level math in the first 2 years, earned 20 plus credits in the first year, or completed 80% of their courses in the first year, were more likely to complete something than those who did not. This chart is to kind of show how you can kind of dig deeper into this data, and doing so can illuminate some possible areas for intervention. So for example, we looked at students who did or did not complete math in the first 2 years of college. And of those students, only 17% actually did complete college-level math. Of the students who did not do so, about half didn't even attempt math. So this suggests, for example, that better remediation policies or guidance procedures would be helpful. Of the half that did attempt, about 2/3 enrolled only in remedial math but did not take a higher-level math course. Of the third that did try college-level math, 1/3 failed and 2/3 dropped. Okay, so as far as making use of milestones and what it will take, first, a robust data system is needed. Obviously, you need student-level transcript data, demographic variables, and such as income is often one that's problematic. Assessment info, we need to understand who needs remediation, not just who took, because they're separate concepts. Additionally, there needs to be a willingness or courage to use these things for accountability purposes or for funding. I mean, on the one hand, they do kind of show the progress that students are making. On the other hand, they also illuminate where students are not progressing. And additionally, you could extend these and possibly gain further support, such as tracking students into the public universities or into the workforce. And thank you.
Next, I have the opportunity, I'm Richard Rhodes, president of El Paso Community College, and I have the opportunity of serving on the Formula Funding Committee for Community and Technical Colleges for the Commissioner. And we have, as a part of our charge, we took a look at incentive-based funding models to make our recommendation. And so I'll have the opportunity today to give you what our recommendation is on incentive-based funding for community and technical colleges in the state of Texas. And to start that discussion, I want to kind of walk you through the important role that community colleges play in the state of Texas. That community, and we heard it attested to last night by the President in his State of the Union speech. But community and technical colleges in the state of Texas are key to economic wellness and development of our individual communities and the state as a whole. And it's recognizing this diversity within each of our communities and the economic demographics that are so different in each of our communities, and understanding that kind of leads to our recommendation for momentum points. That if we take a look at, and one of the states that we looked at was the state of Washington, and they've done a great deal of deliberative and intentional evaluation and conversation before they ever established the momentum point process that they currently use as an incentive-based funding mechanism. And so I would like to give you, on this first slide, will be the recommendations that came out of our committee. And first is that we use a study year, and we're recommending that the 2010-11 be the fiscal year 2010-11 be that year that we actually study in more depth and detail the state of Washington model and kind of use that as a basis. Now, granted that it has only been in existence in the state of Washington since 2006-2007, and there's not a lot of data yet, but the data that is beginning to come out through the Community College Research Center is very encouraging that, yes, indeed, it is making a difference in student persistence. And so we want to use that model kind of as a benchmark to study and evaluate during 2010-11, and then during the 2011-12 year, then we collect the data that we have determined is important to the state of Texas, because there may be some data elements that will be different than what we want to measure against that is used in the state of Washington. So the study year, we come up with those elements that we think are critical to the state of Texas. 2011-12 we use as a baseline year. We capture the data. A lot of the data that Jeremy has talked about, capture it, use that as a baseline, and then make the recommendation for how much the incentive funding model should be. And I think one of the key elements in this is funding for student achievement momentum points should be viewed as an incentive model over and above the formula model itself. Some states in the past, historically in the 1990s, 1980s, made some major mistakes because they based too much of the formula on performance-based mechanisms, and they jumped ahead of the game and later had to retract. And so I think the intentional and deliberative study time is critical to the success, and I think it's critical to gaining buy-in from all the constituents. And so we've got to make sure that it is a process that includes representatives from the various groupings, including our teachers. Also, momentum point methodology needs to make sure that we incorporate it to view a student's pathway, their progress, from that least prepared student, a student who may enter the community college system needing ESL, needing English as a second language, the least prepared student to the most college-ready student. Because in some of our communities, we have a higher number of students who are college-ready. Other communities, we have a larger number of students who are from low-income, first-generation families who are starting at a deficit and need some additional help. And so putting in a momentum-based incentive plan allows you to measure that pathway of progress from the least prepared to the most prepared. In our recommendation, we then gave some metrics. And if you can back up one slide. Not that these are exactly what we should use, but these are some samples, many of which came from the state of Washington. But these are examples, and one of them is, the first is basic skills, and looking at significant gains in pre-test, post-test for those students who come to us who do not have a high school diploma nor GED, but need to make it to that next step. Next is English as a second language. And again, using a pre-test, in the state of Washington, they use a test called CASAS. A pre-test and then post-test measure along the way to see the improvement in a student's pathway in gaining competence in the English language to be ready for the rigor of a college-level education. Developmental education, completion of the developmental course sequence, and again tied to college readiness testing, whether it's AccuPlacer or Compass or whatever measurement tool that we use, using a pre-test, and then how did we assist that student in making it through the developmental needs that they have to get ready for their first college level class. Gateway courses. Once a student enters into the college level coursework, usually college algebra, the first college math class is the one that is the stumbling block in most of our communities, and the first college level English, the freshman composition class. And so looking at those two courses as gateway courses for measurement of success. Then course completion is not used as a momentum point in the state of Washington, but is one that we added here that we thought should be looked at and viewed as a momentum point for incentive-based funding, and that is looking at a threshold, establishing a threshold of the numbers of students who are enrolled on the 12th day of class, how many students complete the semester successfully, and looking at that as a momentum point as a part of incentive funding. College credit hour attainment, as Jeremy related, looking at the first 15 college level course hours completed by a student is a momentum point. Completion of the first 30 college level courses hours is a momentum point. Completion, one that we added that was not in the state of Washington, is completion of the core curriculum. We think that is very important. And then ultimately degree attainment and or transfer to a four-year institution. We use these as examples, but again, it's critical that we have a year of study and dialogue before we adopt what measures should be used for the state of Texas. And that concludes my part of the presentation. Thank you.
Do y'all have any questions of Richard or of Jeremy? Or?
I have one. I'm still having a little bit of trouble getting a handle on this concept of momentum points. I understand that there's certain milestones that a student reaches in their undergraduate education, and once they reach those, you're calling those a momentum point. Now, what's the significance of that other than just being able to track performance? What do you do with those momentum points? Is that tied into performance-based funding?
It's tied into incentive-based funding, and the way that the state of Washington uses those is for each one of those momentum points, for each student that achieves one of those momentum points, it's a point that's added to an accumulation of points for that institution. And then you add up the points, and that's how you distribute the incentive-based dollars.
These are, I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but these are dollars in and above your normal base funding for
Yes,
that
sir.
institution.
Yes, sir.
So you're actually beginning to reward those institutions that are performing above and what we normally would expect to be
Right.
average or normal. And you're also beginning to identify those students that are adopting best practices in order to achieve these milestones.
Yes, sir. And that's along, you're celebrating student successes along the whole education continuing, again, from the least prepared student to the most college-ready student who enters our system. And I looked at some of the data from the state of Washington and looked at, compared a couple of different communities that have different demographics. And one of them is Bellevue in the state of Washington. Another is Spokane Falls. They have entirely different populations. And as far as students who would enter the community college system, least prepared, more of the least prepared students in Spokane Falls, more of the more well-prepared students in Bellevue. And interestingly enough, the numbers of momentum points that each of those institutions earned during the first baseline year were almost identical. And it was because you're celebrating that whole continuum regardless of the student demographics that are entering from your community. And so what you found in Spokane Falls is a large number of students where they gained a large number of momentum points for that institution at the adult basic education level and the developmental education level. You look at Bellevue, and more of their points were garnered up in the level of completing their first gateway course, completing their first 15 hours and 30 hours. And so you find a celebration, in fact, of the whole continuum process of student achievement.
Is this concept prevalent in any other state other than Washington? And if it is, can you give us a feel as to how community college systems are embracing this concept?
It is.
Are we asking, is that, am I getting too far ahead of you?
Oh, that's good.
Well,
That's a good
we're going to be
question.
talking about it in just a minute, but that's fine. Ohio is one of the other states that have implemented it for funding. There are a bunch of other states that are starting to look at it, North Carolina being one of them.
Where
So
are we
there
at
are
in-
more states going that
Where are
direction.
we at in Texas on this? Are we just now introducing this as a basic concept for consideration within the Texas community college system? Or has this been something that we've thrown around for a little while? It's the first time I've heard of it.
Dr. Golden, this came up really last session before you joined the board. As I said, the board had made a recommendation for, as opposed to incentive funding, looking at a methodology for how do we appropriate, base funding. And recommendation of this board was the completed hours recommendation, and that was a same recommendation for community colleges as well as general academics, and that was to look at funding on how many students complete the course as opposed to how many enroll. And so at that point, the milestones had not been introduced, and since that time when we made that presentation, we've heard some presentations from Ohio and Oregon and other people. Like in December at our leadership conference, we had some representatives from Oregon and Ohio that both made presentations. So, Washington, I'm sorry, I said Oregon. And so, as I said, that's where we are in our process, is that we had recommended, we think it's critically important, at least in our last session, that we move towards more of a success-driven methodology for getting our students quicker through the pipeline. And it was the opinion of this board that completed hours was a first step to do that, and our recommendation was to phase that in over 4 years. And since then, some of this data and methodology has come up. So
Thank you.
I hope that answers that question.
Dr. Rhodes, I had a question. However, noticing the slides, you may be fixing to answer this anyway, and that is why you recommended studying the Washington model instead of the Ohio model.
They're both very, very similar. The state of Washington, just taking a look at it, went through a very lengthy and deliberative process that we feel was well vetted, and so it has some data behind it. It's gathering the data, and so I think overall.
True that they also didn't fund it?
Pardon?
Wasn't it true that Washington didn't fund it?
Actually, it is partially funded. I mean, it's a limited funding amount.
They did not fund the first year. The first year was what they call a practice year. And that was to see where everybody was, that sort of thing. So they didn't fund it the very first year. They used that as as Richard said, as a vetting so that the institutions knew where they stood, that sort of thing. Then funded it the next year. So it's now being funded, but it wasn't funded originally.
So what is the comparison with Ohio's funding and number of years of funding?
Actually, Washington started funding it a year before
Okay.
Ohio. So Ohio, this is actually their first year of funding in Ohio, so obviously we have no outcomes for Ohio at this point.
All right. Well, that makes sense. My memory of the speakers in December was the other way around, but
Yeah.
so that clears that up. Thank you.
Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and talk about kind of which states are using them. Okay, Ohio and Washington.
Not Oregon.
So then how are they being implemented? And a lot of them use the same measures or measures that are very close to each other, but the big difference is how they're implemented. And that's one of the things I wanted to get input from the board on and talk about some of the differences and that sort of thing. Some of the characteristics that we're looking for when you talk about performance-based is you want something that's based on actual, they have to have already done the performance before they're going to get rewarded for it. It's not, okay, we're going to fund you in advance expecting you to do something. So that's one of the things that we need to make sure is true. And it links the funding to the outputs. And it makes a very direct tie. And that's one of the things that, as a staff, we really like about the, next slide, sorry. We really like about the momentum points is that it directly links funding to outcomes being produced at the institutions. It can reflect public policy, so the initial set of momentum points that you start with, if further down the road and after additional research, if you decide that you need to change or something else becomes vitally important to the state, you can change the momentum point and implement either new ones, drop them out, change them out, whatever is most important to the state at the time. I don't think you want to do that on a biennial basis or anything like that, but I mean, you do, 20 years down the road, if something else is different and something else needs to be incentivized, then you can make that change without completely changing your formula and going through a whole set of issues like that. So that's one of the advantages. And it's designed for incentives to improve, not to just maintain where you are. Both of these models, and I'll get into that in the similarity, both of these models are based on improvement. So you have a base year line, and that's okay, that's fine, you're already doing that, but how are you improving what you're doing? What kind of progress are you making to get more students? This pipeline is kind of to show what Richard was already talking about, where you get points no matter where you are in that continuum. And they're all, in the Washington model, they're all 1 point. So if you've got a student that comes in needing developmental ed and they complete developmental ed, that's 1 point. If you have a student that doesn't need developmental ed and they complete that first college level course, that's 1 point. So it gives the flexibility for the variation in the schools and the institutions that we have. And that's an important concept to make sure that we reward everybody, not just because they're in a location that doesn't have has a lot more at-risk students. So that's an important concept that we need to.
Susan, one clarification, whether it's Washington or Ohio. If a student completes their associate and transfers to a four-year university, do they get a point for each?
In Washington right now, I think they get 2 points. So, that's the incentive to say, okay, go ahead and complete your degree get as many hours of community college, and then transfer, continue on with your education. And that's an important, we do want people to get an associate degree, but we also want those that want to and are able to move on and get a bachelor's degree. And so that's kind of incentivizes the counseling and getting students to reach their full potential. So that's...
Mr. Chairman, I have two great questions. One, is there means of implementing standardized testing as a variable in measuring momentum points? And what I'm concerned about is, with the broad spectrum of different types of community colleges, is a 30-hour completion in one institution equal to a 30-hour completion in another institution, without measurable outcomes that can be measured other than just course completion. What you really want to know, in my opinion, is what this student has truly achieved. And I don't know any other way to measure it except through some universal standardized testing that can put all the community colleges on the same level playing field. In other words, if after those 30 hours or after the 2 years of community colleges, is there some means of making sure that there's some consistency and measurable outcomes that we can document through standardized testing other than just the course completions? What if a system decides they're just going to water down the whole system and play the game? And here we go. And I'm not, inevitably it'll happen somewhere, that we're going to water down the process. All we're going to do is award completions, and irregardless of what the student ultimately walks out with in their mind. How are you going to prevent that?
I think that's one area where we really have to rely on the accreditation processes that are in place at all of the institutions of higher education to ensure the quality and the rigor of our programs. I don't think any of us in higher education want to see any watering down.
No.
That we want to maintain the rigor, but there are already protective mechanisms within accreditation processes
through
to
the
try
Southern
and ensure
Association accreditation. Through the accreditation process that occurs every 10 years. That's how you're going to ensure that
but you also have to
people are going to learn how to play the game. There are certain people that are going to always learn how to manipulate the system to their advantage. I don't care whether it's in education or in medicine or banking or wherever it is, it's going to always inevitably happen. And, I have a concern that we try to maintain a high level of credibility in terms of what we're trying to accomplish here.
Well,
and I'm just asking.
One of the things that would also lead to that is something that was talked about yesterday. And you look at all the licensures. If you can couple this with pass rates on licensure exams, that sort of thing. So that would, if they're just passing people through and they're not passing their licensure, then that tells you a whole lot right there. And so that's one of those things
if their discipline requires a licensing process at the end of the road of the academic career, then that is a standardized test that will measure and will enable us to compare. Let's just say, for instance, you've got a nursing program in one community college, you've got a nursing program in other community colleges. You can compare how well those students are performing in those individual nursing programs based on the completion course, the licensing rate, because they're going to be given a standardized licensing examination. So that would certainly ensure some measure of accountability in terms of what those students are actually achieving after they get through that 30-hour or 60-hour course curriculum. I just have a concern that is that something we need to be looking at?
You also have the ability to track students. So when
that was my
transfer
second question. That was my second question: is do we have a means to track those students when they leave a community college into a four-year institution and identify what percentage of them are successful in a four-year institution? That was my second question. Thank you for mentioning it. I want to hear your answer.
Okay. We do have that mechanism in the state of Texas, and we're already tracking and capturing that data. And
is that provided? Lone Star tracking?
The coordinating
board actually tracks it.
Thank you.
Dr. Golden, Susan.
Okay. And this talks about how Washington calls them, this is something Jeremy mentioned, they call them achievement points. They started 08 was they call their design year. That's the year where they put out all the data, they looked at it, then they funded it in 08-09. So it is a relatively new as far as the funding. FY11 for Ohio is the first year of funding is tied to it, so they haven't even actually started their funding year. Ohio is actually using it in a broader sense is because they have changed all of their formulas for their universities and their community colleges to more of an outcomes base. For the universities, they're using completed hours, they're looking at degrees only, that sort of thing. At the community colleges, they're looking at student success points, momentum points, pick a name. So they're looking at that sort of thing for the community colleges, but they've also coupled it with a stop loss, hold harmless, of 99% the first year and then 98% the second year. And so that any of the institutions, as they're going to the momentum points, they're not going to lose funding in those first couple of years.
Susan, quick question on that, and I can't remember, but in Ohio, are they driving that out in the base funding or in the separate incentive pool?
They've got it in a separate pool. Both of them have it in a separate pool.
It's over and above the base.
Right. And go ahead, next slide. And both of the states have started with a relatively small amount of money, and they're approximately 1.5% of the total funding for both states. So it's a relatively small. And this gets back to Richard's point of not jumping in. The worst model that everybody can remember is South Carolina went 100% formula funding, performance funding all in 1 year, and then they quickly backed off of that the next year. Right. So, this is a start small. They assign 1 point for each of the outcomes. They didn't weight things differently. Everything is 1 point. Keep it simple, easier to explain. Easier to understand. For both of them, the momentum points are only being implemented at the community college level right now. I think North Carolina is starting to look at it in some ways at their university level, but right now it's only at the community college level. And they're measuring many of the same items.
And your comments about, is this about South Carolina? What state are you talking about here?
North Carolina is the one that's looking at it.
Okay, but these notes about only being implemented in the community college, are you talking here just about
Washington and Ohio?
I was confused because you went to South Carolina.
Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, Washington and
another state clarification was the stop loss you referred to. Is that only for Ohio?
Ohio is the only one doing that.
Not Washington.
Not Washington. And now I'm going to talk about some of the differences, and this gets into the implementation part. In Washington, they preset how much money is going to be associated with each point. So for simplicity's sake, each point is $10. That's it. You add up. They have a maximum amount that's going to be allocated to each institution, each of their community colleges. And they go up, and that amount of money goes to that institution, and that becomes part of their base funding. So that's how Washington is doing it. It becomes part of their base funding. So they automatically get that amount each year. What they do from then on is if you've reached 100 momentum points, and then the next year you're at 110 momentum points, you only get paid for those 10 additional momentum points in the following year. But that then becomes part of your base funding for each institution.
Rolling a cumulative amount.
Right.
What happens if the institution slides back?
The only time that you get your base is reduced is if there's an across-the-board cut in funding to everybody's base, which they may be having this year, but, so they cut it then, or if your enrollment drops. And that is how they've set theirs up. So that's one of the differences.
Susan, can I add another question? Are the funds at the front end allocated by institution, or is there one pool for all community colleges?
In Washington,
the best performing community college gets the bulk of the funds?
No, in Washington, a set of funds is allocated to each institution. If you do not earn all of your allocation, that goes back to GR. If you earn over it, you've got a maximum amount you're going to earn.
You're capped.
You're capped. So that is the Washington model. So now I'm going to switch over to the Ohio model, which is different in the implementation. They're looking at many of the same measures, implemented very differently.
Susan, can I ask a question, Mr. Chairman?
Dr. Elder.
Are we, in this process that we're looking at, are we totally eliminating the variables of course completion and graduation rates?
That has not,
I mean,
no.
is that
In
still
fact,
going to
one
be
of the
a variable that we're
ones-
going to consider
One
in
of the
terms
things
of
that
funding?
One of the things that the Community College Formula Advisory Committee is recommending to look at is course completion. So
Would
that
that-
is one of the things
So
It's a milestone.
as a milestone, as a milestone.
And degree completion.
Okay, so we're not throwing out the window and completely looking at whole means of
No, we're not throwing
Those-
anything
those
out.
variables are still in.
This is strictly a discussion to kind of get input from the board. It's a very different than anything we've done in the past, and we want to give everybody kind of a chance to get familiar with it, to ask whatever questions you have, so that when we come forward with our Formula Advisory Committee
those milestones.
recommendations at your next meeting, you'll have a better feel for what we're talking about when we start talking about, because next meeting you'll get a full dose of formula funding. Which the old board members are going, oh my God, no, please, run away.
Always an exciting.
Okay, so for the Ohio model, it's a very different. They have a total pot of money. Each of the institutions add up the total, and then you get your proportionate share of the money allocated. So it is more like the incentive funding that we have for the universities. So those are two very different things. The funding is more variable, because if your momentum points go down, you're just not going to get as much. It is based, instead of being on a year-to-year increase, it is a 3-year average, looking at the number of points. So that does kind of smooth out the variability. So those are some of the differences. And like I said, Ohio's not actually even funding till FY11, so trying to do a comparison of which way is going to work best is not easy at this point.
And Ohio's does not roll into the base.
Does not roll into the base. Does not become part of the base. But what they have done is, with the small amount of money, again, it's 1.5%. It was 5% of their new money, came out to 1.5% of their total budget. But in doing it that way, that allows their legislature to kind of divvy up and decide how they want to put more money in each year. Do they want to fund more on performance? Do they want to fund more on, and they fund the rest of their formula on enrollment, not on completed hours.
Susan, again, thinking back to the speaker from Ohio that we heard at our annual conference in Dallas, the percentage maybe this was something that they were recommending they move toward.
25%?
25%
Yes.
for the four-year institutions, and I think it was 12.5% for the community
It was
colleges.
25% for the community colleges, too. They were starting out
25%
slowly.
both.
It was 5% of the new money, with the idea of moving forward up to 25%.
Over what period of time?
I can't remember if it was 5 years. So, there's, like I said, momentum points can be used, and Texas can decide to do something totally different as far as implementing and looking at what type of points we use. This is kind of background. There can be, we can use the same points and use them in 50 different ways for all the states. I mean, there's all sorts of things. Some of the things that the Community College Formula Advisory Committee has recommended are not being used in either of the states, looking at, completion as a point value. That's totally different. So that's one of the things that we can do, and we've actually got a group from the Formula Advisory Committee that we're pulling together to start looking at and running some of the data to see where the states are going, see how the institutions would come out, looking at the number of points and that sort of thing. So we're already moving forward on doing the study that Richard is talking about now.
Ms. Mendoza?
Real quickly, one of the exciting parts also about what you all provided for us in looking at momentum and milestones and things like that was the fact that you could take the data and roll back to see where are the barriers to success. And in doing so, and identifying the correct milestones to be tracked or momentum points to be tracked, it would be nice for us in Texas to make sure that we are hitting those barriers so that we can identify them to use them to enable student success. So will your committee really be looking in that vein to make sure that the data will come out so we can eliminate some barriers to success?
That's the real intent, is to, I think as Jeffrey mentioned, what you're doing with momentum points is you're focusing on the different significant achievements towards student success as an end goal. And so you can have a more critical review of where the barriers exist, and then devise strategies and interventions to deal with those barriers.
One of the things, Jeffrey, you mentioned was the lack of, was the lack of some data elements like financial data. Can we be sure that as we're looking at this, we're actually going to have the data and the data systems to enable us to do exactly that?
That is one place where Texas is ahead of California, and we were actually moving further ahead because starting in the summer of 2011, we will be getting individual student transcript level data. So we will know students in which courses, what they complete, and the grade that they receive in those courses. That process is already in place, and we've sent out to all the community colleges and universities a draft of what the reporting would look like. Actually went out earlier this week. So we can already track across institutions how are they doing. We don't have income level for everybody, only those that are in financial need, which is one of the things that we've looked at. So but we do already have who's in remediation, how did they do on their score, what level of remediation are they going into? Are they going into the very bottom level, or are they in the very top level of remediation? So that's all information that Texas already has, so we're way ahead of them on that one.
And here again, the other exciting point that I gleaned from the information really is that the word momentum actually means something in this case, and it's based on that research that indicates if you're here at a certain time and place that you are creating momentum to successfully move through the pipeline. So I think this is very exciting for us to continue to take a look at, and I appreciate the advisory committee being open-minded to embrace this kind of effort.
Mr.
We're fortunate in Texas. Jeremy made the point that I think the term he uses is we need a robust data system to actually track these different levels of achievement and momentum points. And I think we're one of the few states that actually has that kind of data system, which gets back to your question, Dr. Golden, that we do have the data capacity to do this. And the pathways work will strengthen our capacity to measure success and student achievement in a very nuanced way. That's
yes,
correct?
It will, because the pathways, we look at the course taking patterns and the grades where the students get at the high school level and then at the college level, and look at that comparison. And Richard's nice enough to be helping us with that effort too.
Susan, would you real quickly, just for the new board members, just give a different definition of pathways? We assume everybody understands all the terminology. Maybe Durga, you and Dr. Golden understand all that, but
no, I don't.
For your benefit,
that's what I was getting to.
Sorry about that. The Pathways model is a project that we work on. It's very local, and it looks at the vertical teams. We get data not only from the community colleges and universities in a specific area, but also some of the ISDs in that area. We look at individual students in their courses, the grades they receive. But one of the most important pieces of the Pathways model is it's all data-based, and we look at all that data, but then we have what we call vertical teams, local vertical teams, where social studies teachers and faculty members work together. They do it in social studies, science, math, and English, and they all work together to align the curriculum along with the college readiness standards to implement those college readiness standards starting, some of them start in 6th grade, some of them start in 9th grade, but to align the curriculum and to get, so that they're working together and know how the students are doing, and it's, you know, looking very good. I mean, San Antonio was the first place that it started, and they've made some implementation changes at the ISD level, made some curricular changes at the ISD level. This is the first year of those, so we don't really, unfortunately, we don't have a lot of data, but we've gotten a lot of really good feedback in San Antonio. We've had faculty members that go to the high schools and sit in the classes so that they can see what the teachers are dealing with. Teachers are coming to the universities and to the community colleges to see, you know, to get a flavor for both sides, and so I think it's been a really good process. And it gives us a whole lot of data to show and to find out where students are falling down and what is going on. So this is a very important, it's a good step. We're starting one in Houston, actually, and we're starting one in El Paso and some other places.
The reason I wanted Susan to touch briefly on this Pathways model, I really believe if we take the Pathways model statewide, and we will certainly seek the funding to do that, that might be the linchpin that enables us to create the required or the desired level of alignment between K through 12, community colleges, and four-year institutions. And will also get us to the point which we need to reach where every reform we undertake will be data-driven. It will be based on actual information about student success, and that's critical to achieving the goals. But if we get to the point where we have the K through 12 sector, community colleges and universities in every community in Texas with access to these kinds of data, then we can implement reform, and we can measure success, and we can develop appropriate funding models based on student success, so it would really create a completely different educational environment in Texas.
Other questions, comments?
I was wondering if you are going to track the teachers also or not. We are tracking students. Can we track teachers also, so that we can have some kind of incentive for the teachers to do a better job?
Are you talking the K-12
Right.
Yes.
teachers?
Yeah. Just like we are tracking students, can we track teachers also?
TEA actually had, I believe there was a statute passed where they are looking at teachers and looking at that sort of thing, but that was an assignment given to TEA and the State Board of Education. So I hate to...
Dr. Gardner?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that one advantage of this is that the Commissioner was addressing what can be done at the state level, but I think in some ways the most important aspect is what can be done at the local level, which means what's happening in San Antonio and will be in Houston and El Paso later is the local school districts can look at that kind of performance themselves at the local level, where you can really make those decisions, and where you really cannot do that at the state level in an effective kind of way. But they can look and determine whether teachers have the right kind of assignments in a similar way to, we tell a story about a university that discovered one chemistry professor had a disproportionate number of students failing, but when they looked at the students, they were similar to the other chemistry professors, and eventually they moved that person out, and he functioned very well at another level. They had someone else teaching the students, and the performance went up. That just wasn't the right course for them. So this is a tool that will enable people at the local level to do that, and because you have school districts directly involved, you have the faculty directly involved in doing this, and it also enables them to see whether they are actually providing the right kind of instruction, say in their Algebra 2 class, based upon performance when they go on to, say, El Paso Community College or to one of the Alamo districts, and make adjustments, and the faculty can sit down there and talk about that. So there's this really important aspect at the state level, but also at the local level in terms of providing real data for local decision making in a place where they really know all the players. I think that's really critical.
Dr. Gardner? Morris?
One of the things I would request of the committee is, if possible, for us to track one of the concerns Dr. Golden brought up about the licensure, the amount of students who are able to pass their specific licensures for their coursework at the end. I think that would be important data to see if, to kind of a quality control kind of thing.
And that is something that we already look at. It's
Okay.
part of the federal Perkins requirements is that we
Okay.
look at licensure pass rates and that sort of thing. So that's already in there, and it's in the accountability system. And
Okay.
so
Okay.
we do look at that
Good.
to make sure that things aren't.
And one other area I wanted to also recommend is if there's an increase in the number of developmental education classes that are required to be taken, because potentially you could earn more points with a student if you start them in developmental education. So I think it would be good to track as the money comes out from year to year if there's an increase in the percentage of developmental ed classes that are being taken.
Okay, and one of the things that makes this, I think, a really good system is that even though, yes, you could get more money if they go through that developmental ed process, you're going to get more money if they complete that first college level and succeed.
Right.
And the institutions have to be very careful, because if you've got somebody and you're sticking them in 4 levels of developmental ed when they really don't need it, you're more likely to lose that student.
Okay.
So that is kind of almost a self-policing sort of thing.
There again, the momentum comes into
Mm-hmm.
play.
Mr. Chairman, could I make a point
Dr.
along
Jones.
with what Heather is touching? I don't want to
No, thank you.
This is a follow-up question to what Heather's hitting on. You know, if the system is effective, and if we increase the vertical alignment, then hypothetically the number of students that require developmental education should go down.
You're right. And at community colleges,
I mean, is that
that is
an
correct.
erroneous assumption?
No, that is correct.
And that's ultimately what our goal should be, correct?
Absolutely.
Okay, so if we're really doing a better job in vertically aligning, then hypothetically, in a real perfect world, which we know we don't live in, development education would become extinct. But there's always going to be a need
There's
for
always
that.
going
I
to be a
understand
need.
that. I understand that. But we need to be looking to seeing those numbers decrease.
Correct. And one of the things that we do look at is if the developmental ed from an area, for those students coming directly from high school versus those students who have been out of school for a while. So we can look at the high school students going directly into college and separate them from those that have been out 4 or 5 years and coming back.
Yeah,
And
there needs to be a distinction. But
so that's one of those things that we have the
Heather
ability
is
to look at.
speaking of, and I am too, as the ones that are coming directly out of high school.
Correct.
Into an institution, and we want them to be prepared for college-level courses without having to spend a year in development education. And if we can get everybody on the same page, and this vertical alignment can be structured where it's really effective and works, then that's the developmental aspect of what we're doing. Is going to be less of a drain on our resources, because that should, over a period of time, gradually be less of a problem.
That is what we're shooting
Is that
for.
kind of what you're, and that's what I hear what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing, Mr. Chairman, if you don't allow me, is that, the question I have is that, and I have to put my glasses on to read it because I wrote it down, who initiates this process? In other words, someone has said that we're doing this in San Antonio. Who made the decision that we do this in San Antonio? Let me finish before you answer. Did the people in San Antonio just all of a sudden take it upon themselves in community colleges and high schools to say, we're going to get together as a group and we're going to work together to try to do a better job in the vertical alignment of K through 16? Or did we pick that group as a pilot project and give them the resources and now watch and see what the outcomes are going to be?
Actually, San Antonio, the chancellor of the Alamo Community College District, Dr. Leslie, Bruce Leslie,
I know him.
he actually came forward with the idea. He asked for state funding for it, didn't get it, but what we've done is we've funded it because it does take some resources as far as pulling the data and doing the research, and so we have somebody on staff here where all the data comes in, and then some of my staff actually work on it, and then we have also partially funded a position in San Antonio who works on pulling together the teams and working and getting all the MOUs signed and all the paperwork down there, and then works with the vertical teams to make sure that we're getting them the type of data that they request. And so that is done here. Then the Houston Endowment is funding the one in Houston. They're funding one with Houston Community College, actually, and with San Jacinto Community College District, and then the local ISDs and the U of H campuses in Houston. And then in El Paso, we worked with this as part of another process and are working with Dr. Rhodes in the...
So it looks like that this is beginning to spread.
It is spreading. We're getting a lot of requests to have people come talk, and we're going out and giving presentations on what the local communities can do with the type of data, and giving examples of the type of data that they would get out of this process. We're getting a lot of requests to do this.
We're still
so that is one of those areas where when you look at the budget, you may see some additional resources wanting to be put in that area, so that...
But what you're telling me is we're still heavily relying on local initiatives, local areas to step forward and say, we're interested and we need some help and guidance in how we can make this begin to work better.
And one of the things
so
that
there's not an organized effort on a statewide level to implement these changes.
Well, one of the things that will, as we get the IES grant that we've done, and as it gets implemented, that will require, we will then have all the additional reporting that we need from the universities and community colleges. So we won't have, it wouldn't be an extra reporting burden for them. We will already have that information. On the other side, TEA is in the process through this IES grant of collecting that same information, I believe. So at that point, all the data will already be together. And so any place that wants to do it, starting it. But one of the very important parts of the Pathways model is to have those local vertical teams working together. And so that's not really something that you can force. That's right. That's something that has to come from the local level.
And let me add, in some ways this is like the momentum points in that we're learning from Bexar County, we'll be learning from Houston. Each of these has slight variations. This is, Ohio and Washington have slight variations that match the community. We also know that we don't have extensive resources available right now. We do have an advantage in that we do have a statewide backbone, because essentially much of the data is available, and the additional data is the data that to some extent we'll be adding on the higher ed end with the IES grant that Susan just mentioned. But we are encouraging people to be interested, let's put it that way. So I know Fort Worth is interested. I had a meeting for another reason at Austin ISD recently, and we talked about this. There are people there who are actively interested in, and I think sort of the first adopters is very important, that they really have a real interest. And I think what's evolving is as people talk to each other, they're seeing the advantages of it. And I think that's a very important way to develop something like this, because the real advantage is if you're interested enough to use it, and if you're not going to be, there's really no reason to put it into place.
Well, I think I heard the commissioner say also, based upon the success we're seeing, that it's an area that we might be pursuing funding in the next session, obviously.
And from foundations.
But I guess what I'm hearing, Dr. Golden, is that, I see our role as a role of data collection. I see our role as trying to secure funds for it, but then it's got to be a grassroots local level in my mind. And so I see our job as recognizing the success that's happening, trying to secure funding, whether it's through private or whether it's through appropriations, and then hopefully letting the local communities embrace the idea if they believe it will work in their individual districts. Great presentation. I don't want to cut this off, but are any other comments from the board?
A couple more questions back on the momentum points. When Ohio starts to fund in fiscal year 11, will they have collected that 3 years of data?
Yes.
To use those averages to base that on?
Yes.
Just a couple of questions, then, Richard, I'd pose to you and your committee. Food for thought, so to speak. You've recommended studying just the Washington model rather than both. And I'm assuming maybe in part that's because Ohio's not funding till 2011. But if they're collecting the data and measuring the points, it looks like we're sort of picking the recommendations, or sort of choosing the best facets of both programs to some extent. Yeah, I'd like to see us, if we're going to take some time to study both. One example is you're recommending that this funding be viewed as an incentive model over and above the base, whereas Washington plans to roll it into the base. And so I think it may be useful to try to model the study to do two things. One, include Ohio, and two, and you're really going to love this suggestion, develop a Texas model from the get-go and parallel it with that study so that we can save a year in this effort, because the urgency is immediate to move towards success funding.
Yeah, I would say 2 points. One is I agree with you that all of the data that begins to come out of the Ohio process should be looked at during that year of study also. We concur with that. But I think it's also important that we take enough time to make sure that we get inclusion from the various sectors, which includes Texas Community College Teachers Association, TACC, and the coordinating board working jointly so that we've got good buy-in and that it's a well-vetted process that people have a comfort level in from all of those constituency groups, because we've got to have our faculty assist us in developing this and promoting this. And if we move too quickly, as in South Carolina as the example, it loses all credibility. And we just want to make sure that there's a credible process that our faculty feel comfortable with.
I think we all would agree on the importance of the buy-in and the collaboration. I guess my question is, can't we do that in a year instead of two?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make one point. I really like the words that I just heard our Vice Chairman say, and I hope that as time goes on, we're going to hear that more and more often. And I'm grateful and thankful that we have models that have developed in Washington and Ohio. But I like that word, Texas model. It's a challenge, I think, that we really ought to take seriously in developing, and I think we all do. I think we all want to see that happen. We'll have other states sitting around the table at boards that are very similar to this one, talking about what we're doing in Texas that's innovative and creative. And it doesn't hurt at all to sit back and look and see what other states are doing and learn from their experiences, but probably that's not going to fit Texas exactly like it is in those other states. And I love those words, and I've been waiting to hear those for a while, and I hope that we continue to hear those more often. And it would be even more meaningful to hear those words outside of our own state, where people begin to adopt some of the things that we're doing and some of the creativity that you guys are showing. And I think you're starting at the right place by looking around and seeing what's going on in other places of the country and what's working and what's not working. But we can develop a model that's unique for our state, that works good for Texans and Texas students and Texas school districts, Texas community colleges and Texas four-year institutions. And hopefully sometime other states are going to learn from what we're doing, and then we contribute to that body of knowledge that's necessary for not just Texas but the entire country to elevate our status in a global economy we all know that's ultimately very vital that we do so. Those are good words. That's just from my standpoint. I like that.
Thank you, Dr. Golden. Any other questions or comments? I just want to say to the panel, it's an excellent presentation. It gives us great food for thought for our next board meeting. I will just echo the Vice Chairman's comment in that, success is going to continue to be, I think, the priority focus of this board going forward. We're engaged in a strategic planning process, and as you will see, that is going to be the driving theme in our strategic planning process. Brett, I do agree. I would love to see us, if we could get this to the point, Dr. Rhodes, where when we roll into the, I guess it would be September 2010 school year, where we're building the base year then, as opposed to waiting for the legislature to see, because it pushes us way out. And we think that the focus on success is so imminent. I respect the issue of not jumping into it like South Carolina, yet at the same time, if there's a way jumpstart it. I think there's a great benefit to the state of Texas.
And to clarify, we would certainly expect that whatever the Texas model becomes would be informed and modified as that study of the other states parallels along with our starting assumptions, so to speak. And I like the fact you recommended some points that are already accustomed to Texas and the talk the discussion we've been having. So we appreciate the work. It's exciting stuff.
Thanks to each of you very much. Appreciate it. This was a discussion item, and so it does not require a vote, but we do appreciate the panel and the great conversation, discussion by the board. We'll now move on to agenda item 5, which is our recognition of excellence item, and as our board and the audience are aware of this opportunity for us to showcase we call STAR programs around the state, both institutionally and administrative side of higher education. And as most of you are aware, especially from our meeting the last time, we have received the Governor's Executive Order, RP 73, which directs our board to undertake a review of opportunities for achieving cost efficiencies in higher education. Vice Chairman Hildenfels is chairing that effort on behalf of this board. And this program, which we're going to hear about today, the Mathematics Outreach Center at Amarillo College, is a great example that of a program that excels at creating successful students, but at the same time it's also very cost efficient, so it balances both of those very well. And today we're honored to have two guest speakers to present this. I'd ask you to make your way to the front. Ms. Catherine Wetzel and Danita McNally of Amarillo College, and we're delighted to welcome both of you and look forward to your presentation.
Well, thank you so much for asking us to be here, and in particular for asking us to be here on a day when Amarillo has a smorgasbord of wet weather. We are actually very honored to be asked to present on this particular item. The Amarillo College Science and Engineering Division has the Mathematics and Engineering Department. Within this department is the Mathematics Outreach Center, which we'll be speaking on today. But I think you may want to be aware, and it's reflected in your information, that this Mathematics Department and Developmental Ed Math, in particular at Amarillo College, has been receiving a number of awards during the last 2 years. One of those is that we are the only college in Texas to receive the NAID Award, that is the National Association for Developmental Ed, in all 3 categories of developmental ed, and that includes mathematics. And much of that recognition, and I think many other ones that we've received, have been the result of what they've been able to do with this Mathematics Outreach Center. We're just back from Orlando, literally. We were at the Bellwether, which is a national award for community colleges. We are one of the 10 finalists in the category of instructional program and services. And as a result of that, we will be using some material that we prepared for that particular award in today's presentation. I'm going to turn over the presentation to Dr. Kathy Wetzel. Dr. Wetzel is the chair of Mathematics and Engineering at Amarillo College. And just a little bit of trivia, she is also a nuclear engineer. So she makes it very special for a lot of students.
Yeah, I second you. Thank you for having us today, and I just wanted to pass on the fact that my department was extremely honored to achieve the STAR Award, and the students are also thrilled. And so, especially the ones that are in the Outreach Center, they were very excited. So I want to move on and not take too much of your time. So we have had a developmental math program since 1980 in Amarillo College. We've done various strategies to try to improve that because, like the other presenters said, we're very typical. We have about 3,000 students in the long semester enrolled in all math courses. Of the 3,000 to 3,200, 2,000 will be in developmental math. And so it's kind of disheartening to look at 2/3 of your student body being underprepared, but we work very diligently to try to prepare them for college algebra and college level courses. So in 1980, we started what's called a math lab, where they took their tests outside of class time to allow them to have more time for mastery. We've done various strategies, including looking at books, various curriculum changes, the incorporation of technology. We have always had a heart for the students, especially for the developmental program, which is supported by the administrators and the Board of Regents. Every time we want to try something, they're always there for us, and I want to applaud them for that. But our last endeavor was started in 2005, and it's called the Outreach Center, and it's located right next to the math lab. It originated because of the students' cry for assistance. I have 40 teachers, 20 are full-time, about 20 are part-time. The majority of developmental is taught by the part-time. It's hard to find a teacher to get help when they are part-time. And the students were just crying out for tutoring, for help, for assistance, any kind of extra help that they could get. We did have a peer tutoring system, which was working as hard as it could. It was difficult for them to find tutors, qualified tutors. It was in another area, another building, very restricted, and the students were constantly coming to us and saying they can only help like 30 or 40 students. And there's 2,000 in developmental math alone, much less the transfer level. We just weren't meeting a need. So we started the Outreach Center. We borrowed and still use funds from the peer tutoring. They just pay it over in our area. We use a room that was a little used computer room right next to the math lab, scrounged furniture, plants to make it look halfway hospitable when you came in. Use peer tutors and use a very small fraction of a budget to hire one full-time person and 3 part-time people to staff this. We provide voluntary tutoring for anyone who wants it at any level, all the way through the calculus series. We do require mandatory tutoring in developmental math if you fail a test. So if you fail a test, there's something going wrong. A lot of the times, bless their little hearts, they don't inquire as to what went wrong. They just accept the failing grade. So we do intervene. We go over their tests with them. We try to help them be a better prepared student. How could you have done this differently? That we had anticipated. We had not anticipated the fact that it became its own little community. And so the students have bonded together. They help each other. They're out in the halls helping each other. They take care of each other. They check on each other. If someone's not there, they call each other. It has helped that. We've also hired senior citizens from the Senior Citizens Program that the federal government pays for. They provide us with statistical analysis. They serve as receptionists. They make phone calls, do emails, in an attempt to try to keep the students there. Now, you have a book that's sitting next to you, and it has a lot of this data in it, and I've culled some of the pictures from there. But if you look at this graph, right here is this first little blip, and that was the number of tutoring sessions prior to the Outreach Center. They provided 1,085 tutoring sessions last year that they did math in another area. A tutoring session being you come in, whether you stay for 20 minutes or you stay for an hour, it's a tutoring session. You come back, it's another tutoring session. So working their best, they could only provide that many tutoring sessions for over 3,000. Well, that was during the whole year, so that would have been 6,000 students altogether. The very next year after we started the Outreach Center, if you look at this steady increase, we had over 7,000 tutoring sessions in just the fall and the spring together. We don't count the summers for the purposes of this presentation because the student enrollment in the summers is substantially different than the student enrollment in the fall and the spring. They're stronger students, they're more self-confident, or they wouldn't be taking a summer class. And so everything is substantially different. We do offer this during the summer, but the data I'm showing you only talks about the regular fall and spring. That was a 600% increase in the number of tutoring sessions in just 1 year. We had not anticipated that load. We spent our time just trying to keep our nose above water. And as you can see, it has a steady increase. This last year, we had over 13,000 tutoring sessions in the fall and spring together. That's a 1,200% increase. And this year, we anticipate 15,000 or some odd tutoring sessions for this year in the fall and the spring. Now, that tutoring sessions could have been like 10 minutes apiece or 2 hours. So if you'll go to the next slide. Again, before, in 2004 and 2005, the tutoring sessions we're limited to an hour. That's all you got. And they did, and we'll look at this last column in a minute. So here's my actual numbers. The little plus sign says that despite our best efforts, students do get in and out without signing in and out, so I know I have at least that many, most likely more. The average length of time they're staying in there is 70 minutes. So some are only in there for about 15, 20 minutes, but some are in there for several hours. We do all of this in 650 square feet. And that's, we've got tables and everything in there, so actually there's not very much wiggle room in there. It gets very busy. So one of the things I thought you might be interested in is if you take the number of sessions that I can account for, multiply by the number of minutes they're in there, and then divide back out by 60, that tells you the number of tutoring hours that I have to supply on paper. So I have to supply close to 16,000, or actually the students demand 16,000 hours, man-hours of tutoring. I only pay for 9,000. So what happens is the tutors have to cruise. They go around constantly. I'll have 3 or 4 people in there, and it's constant going around, checking on someone, moving on, and coming back. We're open about 60 hours a week. So they're constantly doing this. Okay. Now, one of the things that I had not anticipated was that I had anticipated being able to provide tutoring. I then just tried to keep my nose above water, but then I started wondering what we were having an effect, if any, on the tests, on the abilities in the classroom setting. So the transfer level is all independent. I can't really track that because each teacher makes their own tests, they have their own requirements, they do their own grading. In the developmental math, it's standardized, and we have different forms of the same test, all made out by one person. All the students take that, they have the same homework assignments, the same grading schemes. So I did look at the developmental math to see if we were having an effect based on the mandatory tutoring. So assuming that you had failed a test, which means you did not understand what was happening on that test, and you came in for the mandatory tutoring, what was your change in grade compared to before we had the outreach center and the mandatory tutoring to now? In basic math, which is our lowest level skills, their increase in score after the mandatory tutoring was 92%, almost 93% of what it had been prior to that when they were left on their own. Intermediate algebra is our next best result, and then our lowest result really was beginning algebra. It shows a 30% increase from what they can do on their own. But what's interesting about beginning algebra is the grades are actually shifting. So I'm getting more A's than I had. The B's are shifting to A's, the C's are shifting to B's. I have 7% fewer withdrawals and failures than I did before.
How many fewer withdrawals and failures?
They're shifting down by about 7%. So, and a lot of this data is in your report. So that was interesting. I had not anticipated that exactly, but it's a very nice benefit. And so that's the benefit for the students. For my benefit, it allows me to track things that I hadn't looked at before. Why is beginning algebra not showing such a big return? We're looking into that. We have strategies for this year. It provided me an oversight of all the teachers' endeavors. The students just love it. As you can tell, they're in there all the time. And so, but like I said, I have this data, and I want to show you one more slide. And as you mentioned, we do try to provide services, but there is a limit to how much you can afford to provide. There has to draw a line somewhere. So it is interesting that we've actually been able to get cheaper, okay, per person. Okay, so before, I did check with the peer tutoring group. It cost them approximately $1, a little over $1 per student minimum assistance that they supplied to these 1,000 students. Now, these two lines I need to explain just slightly. In the booklet that I gave you, there is a budget section, and there's a large page which you could look at later, and my budget comes from 3 sources. The full-time and the 3 part-time people are institutional funds. The student tutors come from primarily federal work-study money, which I don't have to put into my department budget. And then the senior citizens are paid by the federal state. I do not even cut them a check. And as I said, they do phone calls, receptionist work, statistical entry. They sometimes tutor for me. And so there's 2 different ways to look at how much this actually costs me. So this first line right here, to provide these 13 or almost 14,000 sessions for an average of 69.3 minutes, it only cost me less than a dime. per student minute of assistance if I have to pay for all of that myself, so that if the federal work study went away and the senior aid program was not available and I had to incorporate that, it would still only cost me less than a dime to provide that much of a service. However, since I do only provide the institutional funds for the full and the 3 part-time people, it costs me less than a nickel to do the student minute of assistance for that kind of a return. So we're very pleased. Now, statistics are great, and as she mentioned, I'm an engineer by training, and I teach math by choice. So as a mathematician and a statistician and an engineer, I really do like statistics, and I appreciate those tremendously. But statistics don't reflect the heart of what it is that we try to do, and I'm very proud of my department in that, despite the fact that we're all very much by the book and everything for math, we would do anything to help a student be successful. If you need it, we are there for you across the board. I can't think of a single teacher who would not do that. And so I wanted to show you who we're doing this for. So we have a brief little 5-minute movie from our students. It's a message to you. And they do talk about the math lab. They call it the math lab, but they're actually talking about the outreach tutoring center.
Now, before I even got to college, this is how I felt about math. If it had a face, I'd punch it. It's real tough. Me and math, we didn't click at all.
I know I'm not afraid of math, okay? I was afraid of algebra. I'm very good in addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. I'm very, very good at it. But algebra, A and B and C, scared me.
I had been out of school for almost 20 years. And in school, I was not that good at math. I had math issues. Math is like another language. It has its own language, it has its own terms, it's extremely difficult for those who don't get it.
Tanya, Chris, and Steve are not alone. Math phobia is common among college students. Many arrive on campuses across the country underprepared. To help students like this succeed, Amarillo College created the Math Outreach Center in the fall of 2005. With a limited budget, the Outreach Center pays student tutors through the Federal Work-Study Program and student worker funds. The ORC also hires assistants through the Senior Aid Program funded through the Department of Labor. The doors are open nearly 60 hours each week. Monday through Thursday, tutors are available until 8 in the evening and until 2 on Fridays and 3 on Saturdays, making the Outreach Center accessible to students regardless of class load, work hours, or family commitments. And the tutoring is free, provided to any Amarillo College student at no cost.
Math lab has been great. I've been there for beginning, intermediate, and basic math, so I grew up in the math lab, math-wise.
I've spent many hours in there getting lots of help. And it's nice because they're there from early in the morning until kind of later in the evening, so even if you do work, you can go in after you get off work, you can go in before, and there's always somebody there to help you.
More than a quarter of the students who attend AC are 30 years old or older. Many haven't been on college campuses in years. Students like Steve Russell and Barbara Bodine, who are both back in the classroom after more than 25 years.
You know, I was a little intimidated walking in, for the first couple of times, but they really do help and make you feel at ease.
The first time I went into the math lab, very comforting because the people there, and to this day, the people there have never made me feel like they were better than me or they had a higher degree of math knowledge than me.
And very patient, too, because, certainly you don't get it right away. They keep coming back, and it's really great. I've had a very good experience.
They were always able to talk on my level and teach me how to do these situations and teach me these formulas on my level.
Tutors are often Amarillo College students themselves who first discovered the Outreach Center when they needed help with their math courses.
It's nice working here because I taught elementary school and it's different. Those kids have to be in my classroom. These people that come in because they want the help.
They come in, they don't know how to deal with it, they're scared of the numbers.
They've gone home, they've gone to class, they've listened to lectures, they've gone home, they've worked on the homework, and they're still lost, they're still frustrated with it.
But I believe that it's something that anybody can overcome.
Even if they say, well, I don't get any of it, they do get some of it. And it's just getting that information, well, where are you? And that builds their confidence too, because it's not like you don't know any of this. It's like, no, you understood this. It's just this little part that's tripping you up.
My experiences there have been awesome. Like, I really enjoy all of the tutors. They're all very nice. They're all willing to sit there and help you with stuff as long as you need their help.
They're just a wonderful group of people, and it's very fun. I mean, it's frightening at first because you think, I just got out of math. I don't want to do more math.
I said, help me. And I had tears in my eyes. I said, help me. I can't do this. Help me now.
Then you go in there and you meet people, and they're friendly, and it turns into a fun atmosphere instead of, a clenching, scared to death, nail-biting experience.
She calmed me down, and we started to do math. And she taught me the language.
Each one has like a different talent. One knows, like Penelope, she's real technical. And then Seth, I mean, he can really explain it to you in the terms that you can understand.
If you've sat there for like an hour doing the same thing, they'll still sit there and try to help you and make sure that you really like comprehend it and know what it is that you're doing.
She gave me all the tools that I could ever want for math.
They know what they're doing. I mean, and you can't get that anywhere else for free.
I have a daughter, and I have a job, and I have a home, and there wasn't $20 an hour.
If I had to pay for a tutor for math, I would have probably just left college, not even graduated.
I came to school on Tuesdays, and Thursdays were my math days. And I spent anywhere from an hour to hour and a half, 2 hours in the math lab.
With having the free tutors in the math lab, it's really given me and others a real opportunity at life.
Free is always great when you're a college student.
The number of students receiving help in the Outreach Center continues to increase, and grades are improving. Student scores have gone up as much as 2 letter grades after being tutored.
People do struggle, but you do see that light bulb go on sometimes, and to me, that's kind of the success story.
Now I'm making an A. I made A's on all my tests in college algebra.
And I just took my last math final, and so far I think I made an A in my college algebra class.
I've heard people say before, you're actually going to make me start liking math. And that right there is probably the most rewarding thing that I think that I've seen as a tutor.
I switched my major to go on to mechanical engineer because I know I can do it now because of the help of the math lab.
I made 100 on the harder algebra test than I did on the easier algebra test, just to show you how the math labs come into play for me.
And that is all thanks to the people at the math lab.
And that ain't me. I mean, I never thought I could do that, but I'm doing it, and it's because of the math lab.
Thank you very much. I couldn't have done it without you.
That was outstanding.
Thank you.
Thank you for
And I wanted to tell you, just as an aside, that last lady that said thank you, and several others, but especially her, she came back to tutor because it made so much difference to her in her life. Not just the skills that she learned, but the support that she got there. She came back specifically to help save the dreams of others because it meant so much to her. So thank you.
Outstanding job. Questions or comments from the panel?
Commissioner.
I wanted to ask a question. You probably have addressed this issue. I had a conversation with Uri Treisman a couple of months ago, and he said, one of the things we have to do in developmental education is ask the right questions. And he's a mathematician himself, as you know. And the question he raised is, should we benchmark college readiness in math against college algebra? He said that he's looked at studies that show that the primary use of college algebra for most college graduates, once they've taken the courses to help their kids with doing their ninth grade algebra homework. And he said, and his question was, we could do away with a lot of developmental math if, in fact, we had students taking the right courses. For example, it might be that a course in statistics should be what we benchmark college readiness in math against, and that students might have much less difficulty with that course than they would with algebra. What's your response to that question?
Personally, I'm not sure that being able to memorize the quadratic formula is what you should benchmark against.
Then why are we doing that?
I think a lot of it's tradition, but I think that, to be honest, again, personally, even if you don't go on to use it except to help your children, I think that it teaches you a discipline of the mind and a skill set that you may not be aware that you're using, and so I think it's very necessary. So if your goal is to benchmark it against something that they're going to use every day in their life, probably not. If the goal is, can they think through a process? Can they attack a problem, have a schematic to get to the end and accomplish that? I think it teaches them a confidence in their own selves and an awareness of what their mind is capable of doing, which is not a loss. And so even if they don't use that skill, I think that they acquire a skill set they're not aware of.
I'm not challenging, I'm not questioning the importance of those skills, and I'm not questioning the benefit of being mastering college algebra. I understand those issues, and there are a lot of data on
Right.
that argument that you make. I'm asking a different question.
Okay.
I'm asking that when you take into account all the other factors that play into giving students a solid college education, is benchmarking college readiness in mathematics against college algebra the best way to proceed? And I think you kind of answered the question.
I think
initially.
so, because I think that if you do something that's unique like statistics, you're going to have more people who cannot pass the statistics test than college algebra because of what they've learned in high school. But so I think that requiring them all to, once they get into there, requiring them all to take college algebra doesn't make sense. But you have to benchmark somewhere, and it would be the most likely skill set they would remember.
I have one other quick question. You talked about the reliance on part-time faculty.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see any discrepancy in educational outcomes based on the reliance on part-time faculty as opposed to full-time faculty? Do full-time faculty seem to yield better results than part-time faculty, or is there any difference at all?
I think you can have a greater consistency with the full-time faculty, so I think on the whole you can influence their impact in the classroom easier and better. But to be honest, it's an individual basis. I've got full-time faculty with a 90% pass rate. I've got full-time faculty with a 30% pass rate, and the same in developmental. But on the whole, my full-time faculty, because they teach so consistently, so many classes, they become more expert at their teaching. So I think there is a discrepancy, and you need to push for more full-time because the experience level that they acquire and your ability to affect them and to acquire the outcomes you want is so much better than what you can do with part-time.
Could I ask a question about aspirations? Because I'm really glad that you had the example of the student who decided he was going to go into mechanical engineering. I hope that works out. If that same student had taken statistics, you wonder, would he have ever had that, mechanical engineering been in his mind if he hadn't been able to come to grips with the other? And I just don't know. Anecdotes are always problematic, and I'm wondering how many students might you be encouraging to go into fields where mathematics is maybe not the primary work, but is essential to their work. Do you have any sense from that?
I have, and maybe it's because of my background, but I have a lot of students who go through my classes who change their majors to more technical fields that they never anticipated having. And so I think if you automatically look at them and say, okay, well, you haven't shown that you want to do this, so you should take a liberal arts math, or you should take statistics, and there's nothing wrong with those courses. I teach them, but I think that because there's such little kind of niche markets, they would lose the exposure to things that they might go, I can do that. I might like to do that. So I am kind of worried about, sending them too much afield. But you're right. And I've actually met with him and talked with him, and he's most likely going to make it. He's very determined.
And we have some new standards in place for mechanical engineering transfer, and I'm not sure if Amarillo College has signed on, but if not, I hope you will consider it.
I am with you.
Good salesman. Ms. Sheldon, tell us. Great presentation. I'm going to pose a math problem here.
Oh, no. Put me on the spot.
Similar to your chart where you calculated what the cost per student minute was, I'm interested in the fact that you, earlier in your presentation, you mentioned that you're paying for 9,000 hours, but actually utilizing approximately 16,000 hours. So, what that tells us is that each tutor is handling about 1.77 students per hour.
Exactly.
Have you, a question first, the 9,000 hours, is that the institutional, or is that all of the federally funded hours?
It's all.
Okay, so that's all in.
Yes.
Have you studied or considered studying what that optimal balance is? In other words, as we look at the possibility of replicating these kind of best practices around the state, at some point there'll be a diminishing return if a tutor's trying to handle 6 people.
Right.
But because you're not literally 100% one-on-one with a student at any one time.
Well, no, we are, and I did not specify that, but on the mandatory tutoring, when they have failed a test, that is one-on-one. And that is done in another area where there's some privacy. And
that is focused, it stays
that is
one-on-one
focused
until
one-on-one.
Okay.
Yes.
Well,
the voluntary tutoring is not.
So maybe setting that aside, and that may be the appropriate solution there. I'm just curious if you've looked at what the optimal ratio might be.
I have not, but I need to do that.
Here's the math problem I'm posing.
You're right, I need to do that.
We recognize that we're at a point of, we've got to expand. We're limited, even though we have a large bond that was passed a few years ago, but we still, with that bond, we don't have enough room to expand. So we're struggling with all those issues, because when you see students standing in line in the hallway for over an hour, we know we have an issue. But it's something we have to work on because the demand is so high.
What strikes me, you could almost use a triage methodology for those folks in the hall. How many of you just have one 10-minute question kind of thing, But doing this in 650 square feet, that's pretty impressive.
They work very hard.
Dr. Golden?
Mr. Chairman, I would like to pose a question to you based on your experience. And that question is how much direct involvement do you see or have seen by full-time math faculty in this math lab?
They are not required to go in there.
Well, that's what I thought.
And so, but they do cruise through there fairly often.
Well, I don't mean to interrupt you. What's the average workload? And that's one of the things that the governor has asked us to look at is faculty workload. So I'm just trying to gather some information based on your experience. What's the average workload based on your experience of a math faculty in terms of the number of hours that they're in the classroom teaching?
My full-time faculty are required to teach 5 classes, so 15 hours. And they typically teach at least one overload, which would make it up to 18 hours.
And they're paid extra for that overload?
Yes.
Okay. So they're basically working, if we can assume that the average work week for the average American in our society today is 40 hours, and if we can make the connection that if that's what's average for most Americans, then we can generally assume that should be expected of faculty also. Okay, having said what I said, then we can generally, let's just say for hypothetical purposes, we can say that the average faculty spends 15 to 16 hours a week in a classroom teaching.
In the classroom.
In the classroom. Okay, and you've already admitted to me, or at least you, based on your experiences, that they're not spending little or no time in the math lab.
It's not required, yes.
It's not required. Is your experience that even though it's not required, that they're actively engaged in teaching in that math lab?
Not in the math lab.
Okay. Where are they spending the rest of their time?
In their offices helping students.
Well.
And preparing lessons.
Okay. Do you, in your experience, is that if you were to walk down the hallways of your math department and knock on those doors, that those offices would be occupied by students that are requesting help in their math, and that student faculty member would be actively engaged in helping that student, because we do know that that faculty member would be probably the first person to be able to identify that student that is having difficulty in math, because they're going to be given the test, they're going to be grading the test, and it's going to be obvious to them what students are at risk very early on.
Sure.
Okay, and what efforts is being made, and this is not your problem, this needs to be approached and addressed by administration in our colleges and universities, and that's one of the things that the governor's asked us to look at. My experience is that oftentimes I've walked down the hallways of math departments and knocked on doors, and I've seen posted office hours, and I didn't get any answers. Now, my experience is limited, and as you made this presentation today, I think it was an excellent presentation, but the variable that I didn't see was faculty involvement in remediating the kids that need remediation. Now, we're talking about institutions whose primary role is teaching. We're not talking about major research institutions where faculty have to do balance teaching responsibilities with research. We're talking about community colleges whose sole responsibility is teaching. They're teaching institutions. So if you hire a person who's a full-time faculty member and they're receiving a full-time salary, shouldn't we expect to be able to get them to be involved? I'm just asking, would it be unreasonable? And you're probably not the person I need to be really addressing this to, but it wouldn't be necessarily unreasonable, and I'm sure you would welcome faculty, and I don't imagine you got a sign on there, faculty unwanted or can't come in. I'm sure that you would probably have a sign, faculty welcome, we need your help. And they are the professionals, they are the ones that have been trained to teach.
Right.
Now, that doesn't diminish the importance of having tutors that are students that haven't been taught the most effective means of teaching math, but they still serve a value. They're still purposeful. But won't you think that it would be a valuable, and don't you think we could be more effective if we could come up with some means of encouraging more faculty involvement into this process? And if you agree with that, how could we do that? Without sounding like I'm playing the role of a devil's advocate here, I'm just trying to say, it begs the questions if they're in the classroom 15 hours a week, and if the standard work hour or the standard work week in America today is 40 hours, I know they've got committee assignments, I know they got class preparations, but don't you think we could work them into the system here a little bit more, and don't you think the ultimate outcome would be even better if we could engage the professionals in the process? I'm just trying to offer some things that I think that would make this system and what you're doing, which is already good, even better.
Right, and I agree, and I just want to, and I know we're running out of time, and I just want to briefly answer some of your questions. My faculty do work 15 to 18 hours a week in the classroom. They have to work, they have to maintain about 5 to 8 hours of office hours a week. Okay, now that's what they have to do. My faculty, and I'm not saying this is true for all the schools, my faculty isn't just there for 20 hours a week. My faculty is typically there from about 7 in the morning till about 3 or 4 every afternoon. Most times when I walk down the hall, they have at least one person in their room. So what the teachers are asked to do, and which they do, they tell their students, I need you to come see me first. You go to the outreach center if you cannot find me. So you come, because it's exactly what you said. I know what you heard in class. I know what I need to say to make that thought clear. I'm more trained than they are. They're doing the best they can. So they are repeatedly telling their students in the classroom, come to me first. But sometimes, no matter what we do, when the students have to run off to work as soon as class is over, whatever, they come back after 5, my faculty isn't there, so the outreach center is perfect for them. But they are always saying that. So since they are doing what I've asked them to do, which is to be available first for their students, they generally have people in their rooms, and I don't make them go downstairs. So they're sort of like the one-on-one tutoring. If you can't find your teacher, and to be honest, some students are so intimidated they won't go find their teacher, they go down to the outreach center. That's the second line of defense. But they do actually cruise through because they like it down there. It's fun. So my faculty may be unique, but they're there the majority of the time, and then they go home and do their lesson planning. So by the time they get to like Wednesday or Thursday, they've already put in about 60 hours a week before they get to Thursday. By the time they go home and grade and do their lesson plans and their test preps, because they're busy with the students during the day, they have to do that at home at night.
Dr. Wetzel, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thanks for your explanation. Congratulations on a great program. I was not there for the Star Awards, but all it's done is confirmed the decision that was made on that, plus all the national recognition you received. So thanks to both of you for coming.
Before she leaves, can I make a comment? The purpose of this part of the agenda is not only to recognize you, but for your extraordinary accomplishment, but also to invite all the other provosts and vice presidents for instruction or in the audience to listen to these to information about these achievements, and with the hope that they will emulate what you're doing. So I'd like to ask your permission to disseminate your report to chairs of math departments at community colleges all over the state.
And if you do decide, if someone does decide to do that, the back half of that report has all of our job descriptions, our contracts that students sign, and everything.
Well, the reason I want your permission is if we do, you're likely to get a lot of phone calls.
Please do. And my contact information is in the back, so please, I would love to help anity.
Okay.
So we can copy your homework.
Please do. It's not cheating. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Wetzel. Appreciate it. We're going to move on to agenda item 5, which are the matters relating to the Committee on Strategic Planning and Policy, and I'll turn this section over to Chairman Heldenfels.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just want to, under agenda item 6 on the Committee on Strategic Planning and Policy, there are going to be 3 key reports that the committee in its last meeting deferred to this board meeting that I particularly want to focus on when we get to them, and that's under items E, F, and G. The Closing the Gaps, the report on the success goals progress, and also participation update regarding the certified fall 09 enrollment. Under F will be an update on the Governor's executive order regarding cost efficiencies and our coordinating board advisory committee. And then item G, 6G, will be an update on the 5th accountability system revision, including new measures of institutional excellence and out-of-state peer data. So just want to call your attention to those items. Agenda item 6B is consideration of adopting the committee's recommendation to the board relating to the construction, rehabilitation, and property purchase projects. The University of Texas at Arlington's Special Events Center was on the consent calendar, but the second project on our agenda is a request from the University of Houston to construct a Health and Biomedical Sciences Center building, Phase 1, and Dave Irvin is here with us, Associate Vice Chancellor of Plant Operations at the University of Houston. Welcome, Dave. You're going to give us a presentation.
I am, and thank you for hearing us today. Before we talk about the building, let me quickly address a note from the staff that's on the briefing sheets that you have, and it talks about the space usage efficiency and the University of Houston, because it doesn't make sense to build new space if you can use the existing space you have more efficiently. And it indicated that we are not meeting the standards with regards to classrooms. Wanted to give you all an update on that. We've worked very closely with the coordinating board staff and Tom and Susan to capture data that wasn't included in the previous report. That, coupled with our enrollment increases, we now exceed actually the space usage efficiency. But we haven't left it at that. We've also set in place a university-wide committee that's focusing on space, looking at how we use it, how we might remodel it in order to use it more efficiently. We also have a new scheduling software that allows us to do classroom scheduling much more efficiently. And we've instituted a whole series of policies and procedures with regards to overall space utilization and specifically classroom utilization. So wanted to assure the committee we take that very seriously, and we're taking a lot of aggressive action to make sure we are using our buildings as efficiently as possible. Having said that, the building that's in front of you today is a very important building, one that we're very excited about, that helps us do a number of things in terms of closing the gap, and it's a great collaborative building. It's actually a collaboration between 4 colleges: engineering, national science and mathematics, optometry, and liberal arts and social science. And it's a building that will increase student success, allows us to have more optometry students and provide additional support for them as well as for some of our math students. And it also, in a very dramatic way, allows us to dramatically increase the research that we're doing on campus to meet Tier 1 and to respond to some of the Closing the Gap goals there. Because of that, it's a building that has a collaboration of funding sources as well. We're not just taking state dollars, we're leveraging private dollars, federal grants, and private gifts in a very interactive way. So it's a very complex building, but one that serves a lot of uses for us. It's a 6-story building. The proposal you have in front of you is really for the first phase. Under this phase, we would be finishing out 4 floors of that 172,000 square foot building. The other 2 floors will be shelf space that will be for future research. As we get future grants and gifts and donations, we will be coming back to you for finishing out those spaces and as we attract new researchers. The facility has clinical space, and we're partnering with the private sector there. Part of the funding stream, in fact, is from that source. It also not only allows that resource for the community, but gives our students great opportunities that they don't currently have to learn a lot of different things related to optometry that we've not been able to do before. The facility has animal research facilities, which are going to be very critical as we move into biomedical research, which with the Texas Medical Center we're doing on an increasing basis. So the building sets the stage for a lot of success in a lot of ways, and we're very excited about it. Next slide. The cost, as your slide and your information shows, is $70 million. As I indicated, it's a series of funding sources. We plan to move very aggressively, assuming that you approve it today. We have a contractor and architect lined up so that we can move very aggressively in design and take advantage of the incredible market we're finding right now in terms of bidding projects. With your permission, we're ready to go forward and have this building start construction later this year and finish up in 2012. So with that, I'll answer any questions that you might have.
Members, any questions regarding this project?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a comment on this because I've been intricately involved in this process over seeing it develop now and over the last 10 years. And as David said, it represents a wonderful example of cross-disciplinary collaboration among 4 disciplines. And also, it represents a good example how the private sector, the public sector, can partnership with the private sector to help offset some of the expenses. It represents a combination of TEEP dollars, private funds, and grants. And by expanding the clinical research operations of the facility, it will generate a revenue source that will help offset some of the costs to maintaining the deferred maintenance, hopefully establish an endowment that will help support the ever-increasing amount of technology that will be required to keep this building a world-class facility. So a lot of thought has gone into this. And having said that, I will yield the rest of the board to answer any other questions that they may have.
I've just got a couple. You mentioned that an architect and general contractor have already been selected.
That's correct. So that we could do some conceptual design and some initial cost estimating, and also as part of the funding source is stimulus grants, and they had a very stringent requirement in terms of...
so this will be a design build?
It's actually a construction manager at risk. Okay.
So I know, just trying to relate to the construction start date of September Sounds like you're ready to start sooner if it's already been designed.
Well, we've done the schematic design. We have to finish design in the contract documents.
I got you. And then I was also curious about your new scheduling software. Have you, I know it's just, I guess, been implemented just in the last few months, but have you seen any measurable results in utilizing that for classroom scheduling and utilization?
Probably a little early to know exactly what kind of results, but we have, I'm the facilities guy, so I kind of look at it from a different direction. The results I've seen is that we had colleges who were saying they needed more classrooms in order to teach additional sections, and we were able to juggle things around, so we were able to add sections in business, communication, and some other colleges where they claimed they couldn't. We were able to add some sections by juggling around, which has obviously a lot of advantages. It helps students in terms of getting through the curriculum quicker. It allows us, obviously helps our bottom line. So empirically, there's a few things we've already noticed. It's too early to know what it's doing to our overall utilization rate, but we have noticed we've been able to add
But at least anecdotally, you know that it's already allowed you to offer more sections than might otherwise be.
It absolutely has, yes.
Dave, I'm sorry. Question, Mr. Chairman. I saw somewhere where we had acquired a $10 million grant from some of the incentive funding from the Obama administration. Is that correct, Hill?
That is correct, yes.
Okay, and I understand there's at least another $10 million grant that's in the works.
Well, we have several other applications out, and we're very hopeful that that will happen, and that's what we'll use then to finish out the rest of the floors of the building.
Thank you.
Any further questions, members, regarding this project? If not, the Chair will entertain a motion to
Mr. Chairman,
recommended approval.
I'd like to so move.
All right, we have a motion from Dr. Golden. Is there a second?
Second.
Durga. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. The motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next agenda item 6C is actions taken by the Committee on Strategic Planning and Policy at our last meeting regarding construction, rehab, and property purchase projects. And in fact, I will back up and just provide the board members a brief summary of the overall quarterly activity on construction and rehabilitation projects. We received 37 projects totaling $738 million, just to give you the big picture. Two of those are the ones we just dealt with for board approval, which total $148 million. The committee approved at its last meeting 8 projects, which totaled $189 million. And the commissioner considered 11 projects totaling $335 million, and our assistant commissioner reviewed 16 additional projects totaling $66 million. This summary is in your board books, but that's kind of the big picture. So the committee either approved the project or the evaluation of the project if it's TRB funded in December. The item's informational only, but if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to address those. Any questions, members? If not, the next agenda item is 6D, a report on facilities decisions made by the commissioner or assistant commissioner, which I just referred to the number and amount of those. It is also an informational item and calls for no action. Does anyone have any questions regarding those projects? Seeing none, we'll move on to agenda item 6E, which is an update on the success goal of closing the gaps by 2015. And Susan Brown, our Assistant Commissioner for Planning and Accountability, is going to give that presentation.
Yeah, I'm going to go through this. This is the participation section of this presentation is pretty much an update of what you saw based on preliminary data at the October meeting. So the goal, of course, for 2015 is to increase by 630,000 more students. Next slide. And this is the change. The percentages have not changed all that much. Still 74% instead of 75% of the enrollment growth was at the community colleges. Large growth still, it was 113,000 for the preliminary head count. Even though it did drop by 10%, it's still over 100,000 student increase, which is a huge increase.
There's a slide I like.
There's a slide. We are now up over that little red line. instead of below the little red line. So that is the good news for the day. It is a large increase, a lot of it at the community colleges, a lot of it spread out throughout the state. One of the things I did want to tell you is that we're in the process, we've got about 16 institutions, career colleges, for-profit schools, increase that we have not gotten in their data yet. Go to the next slide, sorry about that. Oops, back up, sorry. Anyway, that we have not gotten their data in yet, but as of right now, we're going to be seeing about a 10 or 11,000 increase if we, over and above this 102,000 increase if we, looking at the career college data. And like I said, we're not presenting it yet because we don't have all the numbers in, and we're working with those. This is really the first year that they have been reporting to us like this, and there's reporting glitches that we're all trying to get worked out, but we're getting closer and closer.
What was the estimated?
About 11 to 12,000 additional students from what we have been using from iPads from 2000. So we will be seeing some increases. Okay, next slide. 37% was from the Hispanic. That's the growth between 2008 and 2009. You can see the other percentages on there. One of those that is really good is for the career colleges, and like I said, we haven't added this in. They've had a growth of about 3,700 in African American, so that will be on top of this one, and then Hispanics is about 1,600, 16 to 1,700. The big one for them is the other. Those are the predominantly Asian, but other ethnicities fall into that, and they've had an increase of about 6,000 in the other category. So those will be over and above that. Now, the white for the career colleges has actually dropped, has had a decline of 3,000. So that's where that's falling. Back to looking at the state, obviously, for looking at our 2010 goals, Hispanics, or the Hispanic enrollment and participation, that's where we're falling behind. That is something that we talked about yesterday at the board. This is not something new. This is something that we're really working on, and we know we need to focus on it. And the Accelerated Action Plan looks at this in great detail. A lot of what we're doing focuses on that. But we are getting closer, and we have surpassed for the white and for the African American enrollment, but we still need to do more for the Hispanic enrollment. Next slide. I'm going to go ahead and move on to success. Next slide. One of the things that you're going to see in the coming slides is you're going to look at this. This shows the statewide target of where we want to be by 210,000 more awards, undergraduate awards, bachelor's, associate's, certificates being awarded. There are two different types of targets. There's a statewide target, which is what you're seeing here, and then in the next slide, you'll look, the yellow bar actually shows the institutional targets. And what we do is we survey the institutions and we talk to them about their targets, about how many more bachelor's degrees they think they can be awarding or plan to award, and how they can target to improve. And they can do it by admitting more transfer students, improving their retention rate. There's all sorts of ways that they can work to increase the number of awards they're producing. So these are the targets that the institutions have given to us. Now, we don't collect institutional targets from the ICUT schools, from the independent nonprofit schools. So what we have done is just added to the public targets that actual, the 2009 actual for the ICUT, to be able to do a little bit closer comparison for reality. As you can see, for the bachelor's and associate degrees, both of those are well above the 2010 targets and well on the way. Here's one area in the plan we did not actually set a target for the white. This just shows where it would have been if we use the same methodology. The institutions don't submit a target for the white degrees, undergraduate degrees awarded, so that's why you don't see it there. African American, the good news is that if you look at the institutional targets, they think they're going to be able to meet this. The bad news for the Hispanic is that they don't think that they're going to be able to reach that target. That's why we need to do everything we can. The good news is that it is actually closer than the participation
It looks
target.
like it's much more closely
It
aligned.
is. It is much closer, and that has to do with increasing graduation rates, increasing persistence rates. All of those things feed into getting it closer.
That bar used to be substantially lower.
It used to be substantially lower. In the institutions we have gone and talked to them, and they have really stepped up to the plate on what they're trying to do and what they're working towards. So
It's less
appreciate
than 1,000,
that.
it's less than 900 difference, so we'll get there.
We have a lot of hope, and we know that the institutions are working very hard on these measures. They understand how important they are. This shows the percentage increase by ethnicity. Since 2000, 22% for white, 54%, even though it's a much smaller number, it's a 54% increase since 2000 for African American and 85% increase for Hispanics. So there is progress being made, maybe not as much as we want, but there is progress being made, and I think it's important to acknowledge that. Here's one area that we are falling extremely short, and that's in technology. Those are the science, technology, engineering, and math. Getting the students through there. We have a lot of students that enroll and then don't make it. The good news here is that if you look at the nursing, you look at how close we are to that target, we look at where the institutional targets are, we're actually doing very well, and this proves that when the legislative support comes into place, things can happen. You can make a difference. There's been a lot of different programs that come into place. There's been the nursing shortage reduction program. There's been some loan repayment program. There's been a large focus on nursing and allied health. So when the legislature gets behind it, things can happen. And so that's kind of the good news about this one. If you look at technology and you break it down, there is a little bit of good news here. If you look at computer science, instead of going down 2009, it actually went up. There's our good news. Engineering continued to go up. Math and physical sciences are still fairly flat. One of the concerns that we have with the math and the physical sciences is there are so few graduates. Go on to the next slide. I got them out of order. Go on to the next one. If you look at how many nursing graduate or math and science teachers we need, and you look at all those math and science graduates that we're not really getting, you see a big disconnect. And that's one of the things. Overall, yes, we need additional teachers. They come from all different areas. But if you focus on the math and science and the number of degrees that are being produced, you see a big disconnect, and we're one of the areas that we really need to focus. There are some things that are going on. There's the math and science teacher prep academies that are in place. The governor's office has just announced some proposed funding that they're going to go after to help in these areas. So hopefully some of those things will make a difference. And that's kind of a quick overview. Are there any questions?
Members? Brandon?
Well, I just wanted to underscore what Susan said. We're pushing very hard on Hispanic enrollments and successes, and the fact that we're not hitting our goals is to a very large extent a consequence of the demographics moving much more quickly than we had anticipated in the year 2000. But it's very important to say that our institutions of higher education are doing a remarkable job. There's been extraordinary improvement. I don't think there's been improvement like this in any other state in the same time period, particularly with Hispanic students. We will keep pushing that we need to do better, but I think it's important that as we push, we recognize how far we've come. And institutions have responded to the challenges, and we're making extraordinary progress.
That's well said, Commissioner. It's when I first joined this board 3.5 years ago, that difference between institutional targets and where we needed to get on closing the gaps was significant, and the institutions have taken it on themselves to really make that up. And I actually misspoke that delta earlier. That difference is now on Hispanic awards and completions is only 125 degrees per year. So we're
with that big surge, I'm looking at President Rose. With that big surge of enrollments, particularly in community colleges, if we keep those students in school and get them towards their completions, we will reach our goals for Hispanics.
Yeah, that's really good news. Any other questions for Susan regarding that report? If not, we'll move to agenda item 6F, an update on the governor's executive order on cost efficiencies. And Dr. David Gardner, our Deputy Commissioner for Academic Planning and Policy, is going to provide the update.
Thank you. Since the board met last, the Cost Efficiency Committee has had its first 2 meetings. The first was held in December in conjunction with a Regents training in Dallas, and that was primarily an organizational committee. The first committee meeting in which a lot of substance was really addressed in terms of possible cost savings was earlier this month, and I believe we got off to a good start. We had John Immoor from Villanova University provide an overview of a study he did with administrators, faculty, and students across the country in terms of how they viewed cost efficiency measures and how they felt about words such as production and performance and various things. I think that engendered a good discussion in terms of how to approach the topic. We heard from Jane Wellman from the Delta Cost Study, in which she really talked about where the money comes from at institutions and how it's spent. That was followed by Gary Johnstone, who's from our own staff, and I think that was an important discussion because our staff had, with the help of institutions, had identified existing cost-saving measures or cost efficiency measures that are being employed at institutions across the state, and there's quite a range of things that are being accomplished already, and also to identify some possible measures recommended by schools for savings, such as developing a statewide contract for natural gas was one of the things primarily that came out of that. That was followed by Lee Holcomb, who's the director of the Higher Education Policy Institute, who had done an extensive review of the literature on topics relating to cost efficiency to lay out additional items that held some promise. I think what was most important is that, Mr. Heldenfels has suggested that we hire a facilitator, and this meeting was facilitated. And the last part of the meeting was really focused on the group discussing what they had heard earlier, leading to some summary at the end of the day and items in which they felt were the group that day felt at that point held the most promise. As an example of that, one that won't be surprising is essentially the alignment between community colleges and universities, how that might, and really underlying the importance, once again, of community colleges to our success and the potential efficiency that community colleges add to our higher education system. There's discussion within that about alignment of courses, greater utilization of the existing facilities and expansion where needed. But that's just one highlight. There were about 7 or 8 items that were identified, and each of these meetings is going to be concluded with a summary of that meeting as we go forward. Now, the committee has also employed the National Center for Higher Education Management Systems to assist with the process and to write the final report. At the next meeting in February, which will focus on outcomes, Dennis Jones from the National Center for Higher Education Management Systems will be at that meeting to give some points that he thinks can help provide an additional framework. I don't know if it was handed out to you. We have a list of the people at our upcoming meetings. Good. And earlier this morning we talked about momentum points. This group will hear once again from the Vice Chancellor from the Ohio State system talking about what they've done with momentum points, also end of course funding and a number of other things related to Ohio. And most of the members of this group have not heard that as yet. We'll also have discussion around financial aid. We have Cheryl Blanco from SREB, who's done analysis of various approaches to financial aid across the country. I anticipate that they will also want to hear about the need plus merit approach proposed by the board and within as a part of that discussion. And that will be followed by Dave Spence, who is the president of the Southern Regional Education Board, who's worked heavily on transfer issues over the years in California and currently working with Louisiana, and he'll provide some perspectives on some of the key points for that. But again, each of these meetings will be concluded by a summary of that day. Ms. Mendoza, it looks like you might have a question. Okay.
When the chair calls out for questions, I'll ask them.
Okay.
She's more patient.
So just to highlight quickly, actually that the following meeting will be about academic productivity and efficiency, and we're glad to have Bill Massey, who's a professor emeritus of education and business administration from Stanford, to talk about faculty productivity. Actually has an interesting paper which talks about essentially, we've always talked about administrative efficiency. What about faculty? So that, I think, will provide an interesting point for discussion. We also have the Senior Vice President from University of Phoenix who can talk about their model. He did talk at our Regents meeting, but he didn't really get a chance to get through his entire presentation, where he really talks about the real cost difference between their production of a graduate versus the typical university, in particular, and typical public university. So that should be interesting, I believe. We'll also have someone from the National Center for Academic Transformation to talk about how one can approach the key courses that the majority of our courses are in. This is essentially course redesign. Carol Twigg was not able to meet us at this meeting, but this is her senior associate. So we'll focus on that. In April, we'll talk about facilities, and we're pleased that Charles Matthews will be joining us. He has many ideas over time in terms of facilities management and how that can be handled across systems. We're still hoping to get Robert Mendenhall from the Western Governors University, which has yet a different approach to providing education to students without a campus site, which has some differences from University of Phoenix. Finally, in May, we'll be talking about operations, and we'll have the chancellor from University of Maryland. And some of you may have heard about the Maryland Compact, but actually that encompasses a range of things from centralized purchasing to greater use of online education and faculty workload. So that's broadly. And at that same meeting, Calvin Jameson from UT Dallas, who is a vice president who has worked a great deal on lean management, and we're hopeful also to have someone from TBM Consulting at that same meeting. And we have one or two other people that we haven't confirmed yet that we will. But that's basically our agenda. This will, their recommendations will be going to this committee in June, followed by a major policy discussion in
to the Strategic Planning Committee.
To the Strategic Planning Committee.
And the board in July.
Yes, yes. So that's a very quick overview. We do have for the audience a layout in the back on paper of the speakers coming up. We do have a website in which all the materials that are used that aren't protected by copyright are available, and with the agenda, and that's listed on the handouts.
Members, questions? We also have two other members of this advisory committee. Brenda serves on the committee because every committee's got to have a CPA, at least one. And also, since Dr. Rhodes is still with us and hasn't left the building yet, he and Elvis are still here. I'm sure he'd be welcome. Any comments y'all have or any questions y'all want to ask.
Mr. Chairman, first of all, thanks to you and Brenda, Dr. Rhodes, for giving extra time for this all-important subject matter. One of our discussion topics in our committee on closing the gaps was this whole area of scholarship funding and the use and the monitoring of such funds. And I know we're still discussing whether or not some of that will be covered within perhaps this area of outcomes-based funding under restructuring the state's financial aid program, or within our own committee. So I just wanted that on the table because I know we need to figure that one out as well moving on. So
the use of student financial aid,
yes,
or
yes,
misuse thereof.
Yes.
We've had some, that actually hasn't come up as a committee topic or item for this committee. There has been some discussion between myself and Brenda and respective to our two committees And I think what we've identified, haven't really had time to vet this with the commissioner, is that first thing we need to do is do some research to see if there's a study that's measured this. We're not aware of any in Texas, but is there some data we can latch onto right away? If there's not, then we actually need to conduct such a study so we can measure the impact of that and get some sense of the order of magnitude. There's an anecdotal sense that it may be significant, but we don't really have the data.
Absolutely. I just bring it up because it was a very strongly debated topic within our committee, and really want to see some highlight to this issue. So however we work it out, I just wanted to mention it right now so that we can make sure that we take it somewhere.
And let me add, as a step before what Mr. Heldenfels mentioned, is Dan Weaver, I know, is putting together an analysis in terms of what controls are not in place regarding that topic, and especially in regard to coordinating board funds, which I believe will be available very soon. But, it's a step even before the extent of the problem.
Yeah, what controls we have now, and then perhaps the Policy Institute could do the search for what research is already out there, what best practices are already out there, and then if that's not enough data, what do we need to do to go about our own study? So those seem to be the next steps.
Great. Just don't want it to get lost in all the incredible work.
Other questions? David, thanks. And Brenda and Richard, appreciate y'all's service on this committee. The next agenda item is 6G, an update on the Texas Higher Education Accountability System, and Janet Mickey, our Director of Planning with Planning and Accountability, is going to provide a presentation. I think we all have a handout at our tables.
Good morning.
Morning.
There are a number of new members on the board since we've done the last discussion of the accountability system, so I'd like to go through a little bit of background on it to bring you up to date so you'll know what the purpose and other aspects of the accountability system are. The system was mandated in January 2004 by Governor Perry. He asked that the coordinating board work with all the state institutions. That means the universities, the health-related institutions, and the state colleges. That would be the TSTC and Lamar institutions to develop this system. The community colleges weren't covered in the executive order, but they decided to join in the spring of 2005. They also became part of the system. There were many, many meetings held to discuss the measures themselves. All the institutions were involved in those meetings, and the major organizations were involved, as well as executive and legislative staff. So that's where it came from. The purpose of the accountability system is improvement. Now, one aspect of that is the preparing, the sharing, the examination of the data that we think of as being the primary part of the accountability system. And this data is on the critical aspects of higher education. But an equally important aspect of it is the creation of peer groups. And these peer groups are important because we have a lot of different kinds of institutions. For instance, the University of Houston and Sul Ross State University both offer undergraduate and graduate education to students, but beyond that there are vast differences between them. So when they're meeting in groups, it's more useful if the groups have similar kinds of institutions. And examining the data related to the accountability system for the peer groups is also more important. So, next slide. These are the peer groups themselves. The universities are divided into 5 groups. They're based on common characteristics like the number of doctoral degrees awarded, the breadth of their doctoral offerings. In the meetings, the research group also meets with the emerging research group to make it a more reasonable size. The community colleges are divided into 4 groups. Those are based on institution size. And then the health-related and the state colleges also have their own groups. I should mention that these assignments are not permanent. They can change as the characteristics of the institution change. change. In this past year, Texas A&M Corpus Christi moved from the comprehensive group up into the doctoral group based on its changing characteristics. These are the primary areas related to the data of the accountability system. You can see the first four match closing the gaps, and that's because we want to focus on the state's higher education goal. We've also added an institutional efficiency and effectiveness link, and it discusses primarily things like finance and facilities. For the health-related institutions, there's a patient care measure section. The structure of each of these various sections of the accountability system are similar. For the key measures, there are only a small number of measures. Each of these usually covers the primary state closing the gaps measures. Then there are a larger number of contextual measures which help explain things about the institutions. And then in addition, the institutions themselves can add a few measures, and they also have the opportunity to complete information, narrative information, and contextual boxes that's in each of the sections to help explain things that they think are important for individuals to know about their particular institution. We didn't want the accountability system to be a major workload for the institutions, so we calculate the vast majority of the measures. We estimate about 95% of all of them. There's another reason that this is good besides keeping the workload on the universities down. It means that all the information is calculated in a similar manner. And by putting out the accountability system and looking at the data frequently means institutions are also looking at their data in the accountability system and improved their data reporting to us. Who uses the accountability system? We're finding that more and more of legislators and their staffs are very data savvy. They're looking for data and they want data, and the accountability system is one of the primary ways that they get that data. We know that the Texas State University system and the Tarrant County College District are also using the results of the accountability system to evaluate their presidents of their campuses. Institutions use it as well. It's an easy way for them to grab some of their own data, but also it allows them to easily compare with their peer institutions. And there are many things in the accountability system that we're able to calculate here at the coordinating board that the institutions don't have access to, like how many of their students really did transfer on to another institution, how many of them are persisting and graduating from other institutions. So there's a value added beyond what they have on their own campus that we're able to add. So overall, the accountability system has become a base resource for data. It's robust, it's useful, and it's very practical. And one of the ways in which it's practical is to the coordinating board staff. Staff use it when they get ready to evaluate new programs, new facilities. They can look there and see how the institutions are doing in the areas that the state finds important, and also some of those areas may be related to what they're evaluating. Senate Bill 174 from this last session requires that we do online resumes. Those were called report cards in the prior session. We're about to publish those at the end of this month, and about half of the measures that are in those resumes come from the accountability system. Also, this time around, the Uniform Recruitment and Retention System is focusing more on its relationship to closing the gaps and those programs that institutions are offering that help with the persistence of students. Yeah.
Janet, let me stop you there a second. Regarding the online resumes, just to point out to the members, particularly our new members, those, although they're not in the board book today, are typically in the committee or board books following a request for facility approval or a program approval, which you just mentioned. A couple questions or thoughts. One is I would like to see those made even more user-friendly so that we could more effectively use them as we review these facility and program requests. They're in there, but we rarely, if ever, really reference them or discuss them as we go through these requests. One thing that might make...
Under agenda item N as an example.
There's an example under which agenda item?
Agenda item N, which is an A&M Commerce. You'll see an example of what those report cards look like.
Okay, thank you. For some reason, I didn't get in there behind all the projects.
Facilities.
We really only need one per institution per
Right.
meeting. But what I'd like to see is that sort of a red flag, green flag system, if you will, that for a while we were putting them in full color, and rather than making that easier to use, it really kind of made it just more difficult. And I would prefer to see those, I'm going to call them report cards, even if the legislature wants to call them resumes. I'd like to see those report cards, if there's a substantial variation, whether that's, I don't know what that is, 2%, 5%, that if it's, below the target, the peer target, the goal, the benchmark, it'd be red flagged. If it's performing well above, it'd be green flagged. So that we get a quick picture look of that institution's report card performance, if you will.
Okay, it's a good idea. And I assume that Susan will be talking with you about whether we should use these new online resumes or try to update the old report cards that we had. They're really quite different.
With you. There are some differences. The legislature actually had it broken into two different pieces, one for legislative and one for parents and external. And so there are some differences, which all I've done is basically combined a lot of
longer?
them. Of course. There's a lot. They're not as graphic. There's a lot more information. They wanted multiple years of data. So, and that's all in
Just
legislation.
differences.
So we've got a little bit of both, and so we can talk about those and share both of them with you.
We'll wade
and
through
make
that
a
analysis.
decision. Yeah, we'll wade
make
through that in a little bit.
Regardless of the outcome. And I think really the same tool would be useful online for using your example, whether it's a legislative staff member or a parent or a student, be able to go online and see those red flags and green flags. So they go right to the heart.
And regarding the online resumes, we're just getting them out. We will continue to improve those over time. So they're going to look pretty plain the first time round, but when we have more time, we'll continue to improve those.
Okay.
Okay. Just to give you an idea of where to find the accountability system, if you want to go to it, if you're on our main web page, there's a link under the Data Resources and Tools section. And then if you happen to be on our Data Resources page, as you can see, there are actually now two links. We're in the process of updating. We've just finished updating the universities, the HRIs, and the state colleges, and we're in the process of updating the community college data for 2009. So that's why the two links there.
And I'm going to step in here because as you know, we've had a lot of comments about our website and the user-friendliness of our website or non-user-friendly. Yes. And actually, we are in the process of hiring a web designer that will take specifically the data site and make it more user-friendly. So any comments, if y'all would like to send them to us, we will pass those on to the...
As a for instance, if you're a parent or a legislature, the term data resources and tools is not necessarily intuitive.
That is one of those things. And a site that the person that we're looking at hiring through DIR has a Lone Star site, and they basically broke it down into legislators, policymakers, students, data people, the researchers who really want to dig into all the detail and have different sites so that it may link to the same information, but you get to it at different points. And so that's one of the ways we're looking at making changes to that.
And if you have any questions about the accountability system, how to use it, always feel free to call me or email. Okay, well, let's talk a little bit more about what the accountability peer groups do. They usually meet at least several times per year. This year they're meeting 4 times. They share ideas and they talk about improvement. One of the past years they talked about student success. During that year, all of the groups, and as we just said, every institution is a member of one of the groups. Those groups selected 3 3 or 4 of the accountability measures that they wanted to concentrate on. They wanted to look at the data and investigate which institutions seem to be doing better in some of the areas than others, and try to find out why and what kind of programs they had in place. They also worked on things like if they had major challenges in an area, they could discuss that with their peer group members. It was at one of those meetings that we first heard about the I think at Washington State effort, where they had work-study students calling as an early warning system, calling the recent enrollees to make sure they were staying up to date. And that program has been adopted by the coordinating board, and I think we're funding programs for San Jacinto College and Texas Southern University. So that's one of the ways that the peer groups are helpful for us too, because they are identifying very useful and helpful programs. So that was a very good thing. This year, the groups are talking about assessing general education. It's a very important topic for them because the SACS, our regional accrediting agency, spends a lot of effort on examining how the institutions are assessing their general education of their graduating students. And so this was an opportunity for us to help the institutions learn from the issues that others have faced, and many institutions have had difficulties getting through this SACS process. So those who've gone through it more recently have a unique perspective and can be helpful for those who are getting ready to go through it. One of the things that SACS is particularly interested in is not just that the general education outcomes are being assessed, but that the data from those assessments is actually being used. They call it closing the loop, and so that's an important thing that some institutions are able to do very effectively, and those institutions that have a good process for doing that are sharing their process with the other institutions, and there are lots of questions back and forth and discussions and name sharing and can I contact you kind of thing, because it's very useful for them to have that opportunity. Involving faculty seems to be one of the things that's come up most often as one of the most important ways of really making the assessment process work, both on the measurement side and on the usage side. Also, this time round, the institutions have been giving input to the Undergraduate Education Advisory Committee. That group is working on a revision of the core curriculum, and these groups have given them some feedback on the difficulties that they have with the current core curriculum in terms of assessing what's in the core curriculum. So in that way, I think they've been very useful to UEAC. Pardon me. The next meeting of the group will be discussing both writing and critical thinking aspects of general education. The institutional representatives are supposed to bring with them examples of how they are measuring those two things. They're going to bring assignments, test questions, and things like that. And then, equally importantly, they're going to bring with them rubrics, the kind of criteria that they're using for measuring whether the students really are achieving the levels that the institution wants. And so we'll be using the information that we get for each group and then across all the groups to talk about the similarities, both in approach and content, to general education. In the meetings following this year's groups, we will be talking about value added, and that the groups will not only define what that means, but they'll try to think about what ways we could, at least in the short term, decide how to measure value added. That would be what the student is actually getting from an institution from the time they come to the time they leave. So it's an important thing, and I think it speaks to Dr. Golden's question about really what are the students learning while they're there. So you can see for these peer group meetings, there's a great deal of synergy between what they're doing and other things that are going on in the agency. Staff members from P16 and from Academic Affairs, and in particular Wendy Ersman from the Higher Education Policy Institute, are coming to the meetings, talking with the groups, and hearing what they're saying too. So it's been, I think, good for everybody here at the agency to be involved in these things. So,
and as we move forward with the momentum points and looking at those points, we will be incorporating some of those into the community college or accountability system as we move forward with that.
And I assume that eventually, if those measures are not in the accountability system, they will be. And this is one way in which the measures themselves do change over time. Like this year, we've incorporated a course completion measure, which we didn't have before, in response to recommendations from the agency, really. But oftentimes, the changes to the measures come from the institutions. We've also made a major change to the transfer student measure for community colleges. That was at the request of the community colleges, and we worked with the institutional researchers to come up with exactly what that should look like. And when we were originally designing the accountability system with the community colleges, we talked a lot about the developmental education measures and how to evaluate that process. We have a member of our team who's on the state team for evaluating Achieving the Dream, which is a Lumina project that covers many states, and they're requiring reports from each of the states, and that report will be run for Texas by the coordinating board staff. But they looked at our developmental education measures and decided they were the best ones that they found out there, and now have adopted them as their statewide Achieving the Dream measures. So, you know, it's an important process that helps. I think it helps everybody. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank everybody who's at the institutions who's been involved in the process. We have a number of people in the audience, I know, who come to the meetings. And Danita McAnally, who talked with you from Amarillo College, is chair of the large community college peer group. The chair changes each fiscal year. But anyway, thanks also to all of you who are listening and are involved in accountability, and see you next week or the week after.
All right, questions, members, for Janet? That was such a thorough and accurate presentation, we have no questions. Next on the agenda is item 6H and I, both of which were on the consent calendar. So we'll move to item 6J, consideration of adopting the committee's recommendation to the board relating to the reallocation of unused fiscal year 2009 Carl Perkins Career and Technical Education Improvement Act funds, I guess we could just call them Carl Perkins funds, for use in program year 09-10. McGregor?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. This item here is to lay out the reallocation of existing funds for the FY 2009 fiscal year that were not used in FY 09, but that can, because of the way Perkins is set up, be reallocated into FY 10. And so what we have done with these different funds is to reallocate them based upon the same methodology that was used for the original applications that you approved in the summer for the FY $10. And so basically we're just pushing an additional $2.5 million into the formula through the methodology that you had already approved. And all we're asking is for your authorization to go ahead and release those funds. The reason that I asked that this not be put on the consent calendar was because there was a slight discrepancy in accounting between TEA and the coordinating board that we were able to resolve. And but we had to include an additional amount of $69,000 from state leadership funds to ensure that there didn't have to be a complete recalculation after the institutions had already been informed what the planned schedule was. And so we made up for that out of FY10 funds from state leadership, and just so that there wouldn't be any problems and wouldn't have to be a reclarification with the institutions.
So that state leadership fund amount that's on the blue page in the book, that was the discrepancy?
That amount was the discrepancy, and we made up for it with FY $10 out of the state leadership funds that we had currently remaining.
Okay. Members, any questions for McGregor or any discussion? If not, the chair will entertain a motion to approve.
So moved. Second.
Motion from Mr. Hinton and a second from Ms. Mendoza. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Members, items 6K, LMNO, but not P, are on the consent calendar. So we'll move to P, consideration of proposed rule changes. We discussed agenda items 6P, 1, 2, and 3 at our committee meeting in December, but we did not vote on these items at that time because the comment period had not expired. And Gregor, you're going to walk us through these?
Yes, sir. These first three items under P are all related. They are a recodification or restructuring of the existing subsection E in our current rules. And the reason we are separating these out is there has been significant confusion at times in discussing the issue of distance education and what that means in different contexts. Under our current rule in E, distance education includes face-to-face off-campus as well as distance education using technology. And so there can be some confusion for individuals looking and saying, oh, well, that's a distance education class. Well, it is and it isn't. If you mean, is it online and available to students anywhere? No, it's not. It's distance education, meaning off-campus. And so we are trying to resolve that conflict by dividing these out so that we have one section in the new rule that shows strictly for off-campus programs and one that is strictly for distance education. The first item in P1 is for distance education, meaning online or hybrid delivery. And this section received very limited comments, and you can see in your original, sorry, not limited, quite a few comments, but we were able to resolve the majority of these either through the Distance Education Advisory Committee, which helped us put forward these rules, or through the discussions that we had afterwards. We have a supplemental agenda for you all to look at with some additional comments that were received after the posting of the board book, and so those are available as well. But this item, as you can see under the rules, there are not significant changes from what was currently there. The changes under 42606 is a provision that was adjusted so that an institution could count for funding the non-Texas student who enrolls for on-campus classes, would also allow them to be counting those for normal, for the distance education or hybrid vending classes for formula funding, which is a recommendation that was made from the institutions, and in working with Susan's group, we agreed was a acceptable revision. And then there were several questions that were raised on 42627, which is on page 6, stating that prior board approval may be required before an institution may offer programs in certain subject areas or disciplines. We felt like this was necessary in order to ensure that both the board and the commissioner were given the opportunity to make revisions beyond the rules as necessary, depending on the circumstances at the time. And it is intentionally vague to ensure that we're not limiting ourselves or your ability to affect the rules in this way outside of a formal board meeting. And so that was the reason that we chose not to make that revision, as had been recommended by several people, several institutions. And so for that matter, this P1 and P2 are the new revised rules, so we're passing them first, and then we will presume give you the opportunity to vote on 3, which is the repeal of the combined versions. So this first one is strictly for the distance education rule.
What I'd like to do is just, if there's any questions, I know these have just handed out, and these are the new comments since the December 18th publication are in here, as well as the responses. So are there any questions on either the new rule P1 dealing with distance education or P2 dealing with the, what do we call them? Off-campus
and
self-supporting courses.
And if I may, Mr. Chairman, if we're going to discuss these together, under P2, I would like to point out that we did inadvertently leave off one of the comments when we posted the supplementary rules initially, or supplementary calendar, and the comment from South Texas College, which indicated that we needed to make a revision to ensure that there would be notification to the regional councils so that community colleges could adjust their schedules accordingly under the dual credit revision was necessary. We indicated that that we disagreed with that. Ultimately, we are providing that notification to the community, to the regional councils, and requiring that all institutions notify the regional councils of off-campus dual credit activities.
And that comment is on page 3 at the end of the handout.
Yes, sir.
Do you have that comment? Good. Now, when we use the term off-campus and self-supporting courses, off-campus is intuitive. I'm not sure about self-supporting. Are we talking about dual credit?
Yes, sir. And the primary discussion on this rule has been based upon, on the back, the last page, under I, on 4278, well, H, and then I, which provides for the exception of dual credit classes from requiring regional higher education council approval before being offered. All other lower division courses have to go through the regional higher education councils in order to be offered by another institution in the region. Under changes in state law, it is now a mandatory circumstance where if an institution is requested to by a high school or a school district to come in and offer dual credit, they have to assist that high school by providing the dual credit or assisting them in getting it. And so it can no longer, the regional higher education councils are a construct of coordinating board rule. They are not a statutory entity. And so when there is a conflict with the statute, which says you must provide this education, and the higher education regional councils, we had to remedy the situation by revising our rules with respect to the regional councils. We worked very closely with the Texas Association of Community Colleges. Dr. Rhodes and Dr. Bill Holda provided significant feedback to us. One of the primary revisions that we did make is in J, and we had merely made a recommendation that these institutions notify the HERCs when they're going to provide dual credit. Texas Association of Community Colleges, the UT System, South Texas College, several other entities recommended that we make that a mandatory requirement so that at least the Higher Education Regional Council and the institutions within its area would be informed who was going to be providing dual credit in their region. And so we agreed with that and accepted that change, and certainly appreciated all the comment, feedback, and even support for the revisions that we're making for the HERC section of this rule.
And speaking of item J on the back page of the P2 handout, it addresses just what you said, the requirement to notify the HERC, the Higher Ed Regional Council. The phrase is not clear after it says, when planning to offer requested off-campus, get that, and/or electronic to groups dual credit courses in the council's service area.
Electronic to groups is when you're doing ITV, the independent television, I can't say what the interactive television, thank you, from an institution to one specific location for a group of people. That's one of the ways that dual credit is being offered at times. And so rather than it being fully electronic distance education in terms of through the internet, where it can be asynchronous, in other words, I can do my work whenever I choose to, everybody else in the class can do it in like manner. This is electronic to groups, and it is synchronous so that they're sitting in the classroom at the same time the professor is giving a lecture or having the discussion. And so,
any reason we just didn't use the term live broadcast or something that I wouldn't have had to ask a question about?
This is the term of art that is used in the field.
Yeah. I ought to give that some thought. Okay, that explains it. Sort of. Are there any other questions for McGregor about these?
Mr. Chair, just one question, just to the board. Will you remind me of the piece of legislation that was passed that deals with the virtual school network, and all of this is encompassed under that in terms of delivery of dual credit under the virtual school network, correct?
There are actually 3 bills, and I may need to get some guidance on bill numbers, but House Bill 1 actually in in 2006 was the initiator, which made a revision to Texas Education Code 28.009, which is the 12 semester credit hours required for dual credit IP, IB, AP, those kind of things. And that does require the institutions to provide assistance in meeting that standard. Under HB 3, I believe, is the VSN, which provides for an additional $400 million in funding for dual credit classes that are offered through the virtual school network. And then, and I don't remember Representative Hochberg's bill, which provides that community colleges may offer courses out of their service area if there is a request made by the school district.
So none of this contradicts any of what's been set down?
We're actually coming into compliance with the statute by passing this rule.
Thank you. Good question. Any other questions, members? If not, what I'd like to do, if there's no further question or discussion, just take these one by one and vote on them. So again, item 6P1 is consideration of adopting the Commissioner's recommendation to the Board relating to new Chapter 4, Subchapter P, Sections 4255 to 4264 of the Board Rules concerning approval of distance education courses and programs for public institutions. If there is no further discussion, the Chair would entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Have a motion from Mr. Hinton. Is there a second?
Second.
Second from Ms. Mendoza. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Item P2 is consideration of adopting the Commissioner's recommendation to the Board relating to the new Chapter 4, Subchapter Q, Sections 4270 to 4279 of the Board Rules concerning approval of off-campus and self-supporting courses and programs for public institutions.
Move to approve.
Motion approved from Elaine.
Second.
Second from Dr. Golden. If there's no further discussion, the Chair would call the vote. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. And then item P3 is consideration of adopting the Commissioner's recommendation related to new Chapter 4, Subchapter E of Board Rules concerning approval of distance ed, off-campus, and extension courses. Essentially, this is the repeal of the old chapter that we just replaced with two new chapters.
Exactly.
So the Chair would entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
I have a motion from Dr. Golden. Is there a second?
Second.
Second from Durga. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Items P4 and P5 were both on the consent calendar. The final item under Agenda Item 6 is 6Q, a report on proposals approved by the Commissioner or Assistant Commissioner since our previous board meeting. It's an informational item only. Members, do you have any questions regarding these items? If not, that concludes the report from the Committee on Strategic Planning and Policy.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman Hellenfels. We'll next move on to Agenda Item 7, which is the matters related to the Committee on Closing the Gaps, and Chairman Mendoza.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. A lot of the things that we are going to be covering are the strategies that have been executed or will be executed in order to move the needle. And the numbers that we looked at earlier are encouraging because of the work of the P16 department. So, Dr. Laredo, thank you to you and your team. This afternoon or this morning, we will be looking at and taking action on key components of strategies to move the needle, and that is developmental education. As we were inspired today by Amarillo College's adventure in math tutoring, last board meeting we were inspired by the AVID program and the difference in the lives of its students that it's making, and we're looking at spreading that across the state. Further on, we're looking at education preparation as it relates to the college and career readiness standards. And then finally looking at adding some dollars to scholarships, and we'll be talking about these in detail. Staff is busy. They've gotten a lot of things going on and things that are upcoming regarding the learning communities, regarding the college access challenge grants, regarding facility or faculty collaboratives about the college readiness initiatives, the bridge programs. The College for All Texans Foundation is hosting a G4 Summit. We've got all sorts of things going on, including a P16 outreach We're having on February 3rd a P16 Institute to bring the councils together to talk about best practices, etc. So as you can see, there's a lot of things going on, but moving on to the agenda to get some action taken on some of these exciting strategies. Agenda item 7B is discussion of the quarterly update on college readiness initiatives. Board members, is a big package. I want you all to rest assured that the committee looks at it in detail and discusses it at the committee level. Two highlights. So on page 6, the regional college readiness advisors will be meeting next week to finalize their regional plans and meet the college representatives in their region. This is the first step towards establishing a strong communication link between the board and higher education institutions regarding college readiness and other coordinating board initiatives. On page 10 of your update, you can review the work of the P16 Regional Council, as I just mentioned before. These councils will be meeting here in Austin next week and form another important component of our communication structures. Both groups will meet with Andy Kessling regarding our external relations here at the Coordinating Board to discuss our marketing campaign called Gen Tech. So a lot of great things going on. We will bring highlights to you as necessary, and of course you're always invited to come to our committee meetings to discuss them further. Okay, agenda item 7C is consideration of adopting the committee's recommendation to the board for requests for applications regarding developmental education demonstration projects for four-year colleges and universities, FY 2010 and 2011. Tamara Clunas, Director of Developmental Education Division of P16 Initiative, is available to provide additional information and to answer questions.
If you recall, Madam Chair, this item was approved by the committee. Under Rider 50, we had $5 million funds that will be apportioned to the community colleges, and we thought that also looking at the four-year institutions, because there are programs within those four-year institutions that are also providing that funding from our College Readiness Initiative funds should also be considered to include two more four-year universities within that pocket of work. This is not money coming from Rider 50, and Tamara is at the table.
Yes. One of the issues that we saw in reviewing of the data for developmental education was that we have several universities that have similar outcomes and have populations that mirror the community colleges. So this is just an opportunity to, as Dr. Rado said, expand the effort and make monies available to those institutions that have similar issues and challenges as our large urban community colleges.
Are there any questions for our team here? If not, is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Hellenfels. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Dr. Golden. Any other further questions or discussions? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you very much. Tamara, thank you very much.
Tamara, you might want to weigh in on this next item in case we have some additional questions.
Great. Agenda item 7D is consideration of adopting the committee recommendation for the purchase of services through a contract regarding the advancement via individual determination, or AVID program. Dr. Judy Laredo, you want to take this on?
At our committee meeting, and prior to this, you've had an extensive presentation on the AVID program. Tamara is very extensively involved in the development of this initiative, and at our last committee meeting, we brought forth the consideration for your approval to initiate the pilot project of the AVID project. There are three components that you addressed, and that was the funding of a four-year concept, but only funds being used the first 2 years through this biennium that would move us into that pilot for the possibility of selecting 10 to 12 institutions that would be in that first component. Once we have ended our first 2 years, it would also then begin to look at our evaluation results before we considered funding and moving forth into the next biennium. And of course, we can't spend any funds beyond that, beyond this 2 years, and into that biennium until approval is granted. I would also like to say that there's three prongs of funding, because there is funding from AVID, there is funding from our college readiness. There will also be funding that the institutions will be asked to put in. So the money is not coming solely from the coordinating board or from the college readiness. probably, I guess, 6 or 7 meetings have been held with Avid, extensive meetings. We are now at the point where we have the criteria by which institutions will have to abide by, the deliverables, et cetera. And the meeting is scheduled for looking forward into February, in March, if this item is approved.
And as you might recall, the Learning Laboratory was really at UT Permian Basin, which we heard all about. So this is not so much conjecture as it is based on a robust pilot. Are there any questions?
After that presentation also by Permian Basin, please note that our staff, Tamara and Evie, and I think Terry, made the trip down to Permian Basin to visit the school, to talk to the staff, to see how that program was being implemented.
Mr. Heldenfeld?
The funding, the total of $2,014,000, is that solely our college readiness funds, or does that include the Avid and institutional funds also?
The 3, but it's also, remember, we're only looking at the first 2 years, so we're not asking for approval for a total of 4. The project would be a 4-year project, but we're only coming to you right now for the first 2 years.
So our portion, if I understand this right, would be, assuming we get the 3rd and 4th years funded, would right now be projected to be $1,534,000. But we're just approving the first 2 years, which total $841,000. Essentially, that's what this action.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any further comments or discussions? Dr. Golden, please.
Madam Chairman, I understand that we are proposing to make this available to somewhere between 10 and 12 institutions. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Will this represent a cross-section of 4-year institutions as well as community colleges? And that's my understanding. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And the AVID program in itself is primarily, its primary mission is student retention during those early years of college, and that's the way I remember it was presented. Correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And we will have clearly defined means in which any and all institutions across the state will be able to apply, and we have developed a selection criteria and how we're going to go ahead and make those choices.
Yes, we have an application. We have an information meeting. They'll be open to all the institutions to let them understand about the project, the expectation, the side of the institutions, as well as what they'll receive from AVID. They will then submit an application to us, and then there'll be a selection team with the coordinating board and AVID to make the final selection for the institution that would participate.
Will we look at demographics in terms of factoring in which institutions may be chosen, number one, and two, different regional areas across the state? Are those viable selection criteria that we need to factor in?
Those are already included, geographic distribution, and in the application, the institutions will have to include their demographic information, as that will be one of the core criteria.
Thank you.
Great. Any further questions?
I have just one question. If I remember correctly, the initial pilot at Permian Basin cost upwards of $200,000. Are we doing a lot smaller cohorts in our pilot that we're rolling out with the 10 to 12 schools because of cost?
The Permian Basin program, they're trying to do all of their students.
Okay.
And so this project is looking at a smaller subsection, so not going to require the same amount of cost that the UTB program is.
We would certainly hope that as this rolls out and the positive light comes from it and institutions see what it can do for their students, that eventually over the years this would become something that is offered to all students, so that you just don't assume at the end of the second year that you're going to make it into that 3rd and 4th and be successful. So.
Starting somewhere. Any other questions or comments?
I have one other. You're going to see different levels of success in terms of retention from institution to institution. And is there any, would that be factored in also? For instance, if you take an institution that has historically a record of low student retention versus an institution that is doing a pretty decent job, is there any value in awarding these to those institutions that are already having a lot of problems in that area? Is that something that y'all are looking at, or is that a variable that y'all think is important?
Well, we did talk about the fact that we don't want to have a cohort of institutions where everybody's really struggling. And we don't want to have it where everybody's doing really well. So we're trying to bring together institutions that across different ranges of their current success levels. So we have factored that in, that it's not just going to be institutions at the bottom, but that they can also learn from the other institutions that are doing well but want to do better. We want to bring them all together.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Golden. Any other further comments, discussion? Is there a motion to approve?
So move.
You second?
Second.
Okay. Joe is yielding to Durga for the second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you very much. Agenda item 7E is consideration of adopting the committee's recommendation to the board to award a second contract under a previously authorized request for application for a college and career readiness initiatives educator preparation demonstration site. Dr. Laredo will walk us through this, and you may recall the first site was or is Texas A&M University. Dr. Laredo?
Yes. Last summer, or a year ago, you approved the implementation of the demonstration site, the first site that was funded under last year's funds to Texas A&M University. We had at that time indicated to you that with the second year of funding we would be coming back with the second institution that came in at the highest rating, second highest rating, and we came to you at the December meeting requesting permission to fund that second institution with the round of money from this biennium. That institution is Stephen F. Austin State University, and this item was approved by you.
Are there any comments or questions?
There was a question raised to me then asking me about the evaluation results for the first one, but we've just started. Site visits have been made. We're monitoring that program as it implements, and so we will be having more information as we get to the end of the first year. So I just wanted to also say that so you, for clarity.
Very good. Any questions or comments? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Heldenfeld. Second?
Durga's turn.
Durga. Thank you for your second, Durga. Your voluntary response was incredible. Anyway, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you very much. We'll be looking forward to those results as we continue forward. Agenda item 7F is consideration of adopting the committee's recommendation to the board to utilize College Access Challenge Grant scholarship funds. Dr. Laredo will once again be walking us through this, and as she's walking us through this, one of our discussions at the committee level was how did staff come to the conclusion that this was the best use of these funds. And with that, I think Dr. Laredo is going to articulate and present some of that as well. So, Dr. Laredo.
Thank you. I indicated to you that our CACG funding is a 2-year cycle of funding. Starting with the first year, you approved our buckets of money where we address specific areas, that being the training of college counselors in terms of the college and career readiness standards, the working with community-based organizations in terms of creating that college-going culture, informing parents about what it takes to get into college, etc. The third part of that was funding for college connection programs from high school to the junior college, junior to the senior institution, transition programs. And then lastly, looking at our funding in terms of what we've done and looking at our budgets, when we made that transition into the second year, we were cut back, as other programs were across the country, by $53,000. But we also then began to really look at the money on the table so that we could maximize the use of everything we have to achieve what this program was set out to achieve. And what I've given to you this morning to help you better understand what it is the buckets of money could be used for within the grant funds. And so if you look at that, there are 6 items that I listed for you, of which we have taken 4 of those and addressed them. which happened to be with informing and the benefits of that post-secondary education, creating that college-going culture with our College Connection programs, our CBO program, and then looking at outreach to at-risk students, which has to do with that same bucket of work. And then looking at the education of counselors in order to help the students that are assigned to them on their respective campuses, as well as that professional development of those counselors. And so when we began to look at our budgets, we realized that the bucket money of work related to professional development of counselors really had been funded to the max that we needed to use, because now it is being rolled out by all of the 20 education service centers across the state. And so this year, already at this point, we've already trained 803 counselors. So the need to then put another $1.2 million into that area was not as eminent. And so we sat down as a staff and we looked at, number one, what are other programs doing across the country? Number two, what are we achieving with what we currently funded? Could we increase the projects that we are currently doing in community-based organizations, in College Connection? And we did that by putting out a second round of RFPs for the College Connection program. We did receive an additional 5. We funded them, and then did another proposal and got 2 more. After that, we did not have any more interest at this time within this cycle, keeping in mind that the funding will end at the end of August with the carryover funds for 1 more year. So we sat back and said, with this money on the table, how can we reach more students quickly if the intent is to create that college-going culture, to get these students in college, and at the same time, looking at our financial situation of financial aid, etc. And that's when we began to look at, and I provided you with a list of the 12 states who are funded with College Access Challenge Grant funds, who are using it in terms of scholarship. We had lengthy discussions with Dr. Gardner, with Dr. Alonso, the staff that's working on CACG, and then ultimately went and met with the commissioner, and felt that looking at providing this money that is on the table, the $1.5 million, could go to need-based only, because that's the only criteria that the federal government under this grant allows us to use it for. Also, in conjunction with the foundation, to help raise the awareness of the foundation's need and interest in securing more scholarship money. And that's how we came to the conclusion that between now and August 31, the best way to utilize these funds to tap into more students, to help more students enter that door at that post-secondary level, would be to use our funds for scholarship. It would be through our College for All Texans website, would be the way that we would make that announcement. Next month we will be participating in our telethons across the entire state, just about, with 12 viewing areas, in terms of how do you access college, how do you access those funds, and that's when we will start making those announcements. And so that's why we came to you and asked you if we could use that remaining $1.5 million that would then have to be put in the trust. We have been also researching that through our legal system here with the Office of the Legislative Budget Board, etc., so that those funds can be put aside and then can be drawn out and provided to the students. The only criteria, as I said, is need. They don't have to remain in Texas. They can go anywhere with that money. Any interest that's drawn on the trust can then be put back into the scholarship and added on. So that's how we came to the determination what would be the best way to use it and who could we tap into quickly in order to help them.
And members of the board, we debated this and had a robust discussion around this at our committee level, and we are recommending approval. But I appreciate, Dr. Loreto, you walking us through this whole pathway that you guys went in order to make that decision and recommendation. I want to make sure that Dr. Golden and Brenda, you both have this in front of you. Okay, great. We just got it around the table over here. Are there any questions, Mr. Chairman?
I guess my only question is, and I will readily accept the recommendation of the committee, but I guess that the committee was the The other two issues that we had identified, the counseling professional and also the college connections, those address what I think are systemic issues, and so number one is I assume that the grant does not obviously restrict us in having it just limited to those systemic issues, even though there's part of me I really like that, in that it's not just going to serve a one-time scholarship need, it's addressing a systemic issue that drives improvement overall. So I assume that was discussed, and probably all the pros and cons of that. I'd like to hear what that discussion was. And then secondly is this a first-come, first-served deal? And how do we make sure that money gets out there? And I mean, normally this would go through a financial aid office. We'd look at EFC and then look at all the grants available. And so I'm just kind of curious how do we really leverage this effectively? What's the plan there?
That's where our discussion really took a long time, because we had those same thoughts that you had. I guess our concern was, after we had already gone out 3 times with RFAs in terms of that college connection and could not get more institutions to want to come to the table at this time to apply with the short time frame that we have, we felt that what else could we look at that would still help us tap into students. The issue of looking at the college counselors, because we had already funded it at the extensive level that we had, and because we were reaching that arena and knew that it would continue, because the service centers made a commitment to us when they became involved in the training that they would continue this throughout the state to still tap into those counselors. In terms of the rollout, yes, it is a first come, first served basis. That would be done by the application process on the website, in discussion with the foundation, who would then be the one that would help us administer. We then did extensive study, they did, in terms of how could they do this and through whom, and then tapped into Scholarship America, an agency that also TG works with very closely with need grants only, to see how they could assist us with this. And they would be the ones that would be going through the applications, if this is approved, would be going through the applications to determine, number one, that it is need only, and then also based on first come, as you come through that pipeline, the funds would be awarded by them, so that the foundation would be issuing the one check that from the funds that had been put in trust by the coordinating board to the foundation. So there would be an entity that will be reviewing every application to make sure it meets the standard, and then it would be given out based on the sequence of how we receive them. And all that is very carefully monitored and documented in order to protect the integrity of that scholarship. That's why we are now sitting in January looking at this when we start, since we've been looking at it since the fall. I agree with you, Mr. Ryder. I wish that we could get more institutions right now to come to the table, but we've got 22 currently out there in that College Connection program, and hopefully with the additional money that seems possible, of course we don't know what's going to happen with the federal government in terms of funding, but there is a potential for $15 million over the next 5 years every year that we certainly could begin to look at, and look very largely at what we could do. Some states only do, and you've got the list in front of you, they're only doing nothing but that scholarship effort. Even loan repayment, even looking at the high needs area in math and science and technology to encourage students to go into these disciplines and funding them. So some have even put all their money into a total web portal. And so I think that what we have done here as an agency is really looked at all of the 6 efforts of this grant and tried to tap into each to see that we globally didn't put all of our money in one effort. And now with this amount, then it certainly would help some students coming out of school in May. Funds would be awarded for use into this coming academic year.
I appreciate the explanation. And again, I just encourage us, as we have the opportunity to access these type of funds, that we do focus on systemic issues as much as possible. But I hear you saying that, and it's at least it allows us to get the money out also, is what I'm hearing. So stay in compliance with the grant.
Points well taken, Chairman Ryder, absolutely. We'd rather teach to fish than just give out the fish, that's for sure.
Like that.
Are there any other questions or comments? Okay. Hearing none, is there a motion to approve? Cricket, I'm sorry. Thank you, Joe. Is there a second?
My turn again.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Heldenfels. All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you all very much. Agenda items 7G and H have been moved to the consent calendar. So, Mr. Chairman, that concludes the items for presentation and discussion by Committee on Closing the Gaps.
Thank you, Chairman Mendoza. We will now move on to agenda item 8, matters related to Committee on Agency Operations. Chairman Havich.
Thank you. Yes, agenda item 8A is informational only. It is the committee chair's overview. The Committee on Agency Operations met yesterday afternoon. In the Deputy Commissioner's report, Dan Griffiths, who is our new Director of the ARA Grants Programs, provided an ARA report detailing the current status and the procedures for that program. Dan Weaver and Tim Deichloff, Coordinating Board's Bond Counsel, presented a report on the loan programs, and Dr. Alonzo provided an update on the financial report. Additionally, Agency Operations considered and approved 6 staff recommendations and also received an update from the auditing department. Are there any questions or comments? All right, there being none, we'll move on to agenda item 8B. This is an item that does require board approval. Agenda item 8B is consideration of adopting the committee's recommendation to the board relating to the approval of a 10-year lease with 1200 Anderson Partners LP for the lease facilities at 1200 East Anderson Lane. Dr. Alonzo?
I'll be glad to answer any questions. The committee approved the motion for us to go forward and come back, ensure that we have a lease agreement that is satisfactory to everybody. We have been working with General Counsel to incorporate language that will ensure that we get the best deal and that we go to the Texas Facilities Commission to the February board meeting for final approval and enter into the renovations that need to be done, and including a timeline of when those renovations will be done.
Questions for Dr. Alonzo? There being none, may I have a motion to adopt the committee's recommendation? Move to approve.
Second. So move or second, whatever.
Motion from Mendoza, second from Golden. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries. Next agenda item is 8C. This is an informational item only. This is an update on the ARA funds. I would like to say, as I did mention previously, Dan Griffiths provided us with quite an extensive update on the ARA funds yesterday with a slide presentation, again walking us through the process and the current status of the program. Mr. Griffiths is here somewhere, and Dr. Alonzo also to provide additional information or respond to your questions.
And Mr. Chairman, if you recall, you had asked that we put this on the agenda in case there were board members here today that were not in attendance at yesterday, but I believe that everybody that is here today was at the meeting yesterday. But of course, we'll be glad to answer any other questions or any other information that you may wish. We're prepared to do that.
Y'all covered it well yesterday. Has anything changed since yesterday?
Got $50 million more out the door, right?
Well, something like that. The only thing, and I think it's, if I can just take a quick moment, Madam Chair. Sure. And I would like to introduce, because even though the board members that were here were the same ones that were here yesterday, perhaps the audience is a little different. Dan Griffith came to us, as I mentioned yesterday, to head up our aura efforts on a permanent basis. As you know, we had Mark Zafiro handling that for us on a interim basis. I'd like to have Dan just give you a little bit, if you could, Dan, very briefly, some of your background that you bring to this effort, and because I quickly skimmed through that yesterday. But if you would, and then I'd like to mention one other thing that has come, that has changed since yesterday.
Wow. We've had changes since yesterday?
Yes, of course.
Every day is a new day with our, well, good morning, Mr. Chairman and board members. Dr. Alonso, thanks very much for the opportunity. Very quickly, I have 20 years of experience in grants and contracts administration. I cut my teeth on NASA and DoD spaceflight programs at the University of Texas at Dallas. Moved on to Texas A&M with the Engineering Extension Service, where I worked with Dr. Alonso to establish a centralized grant contract administration function at the agency. In addition to administration, we helped divisions write proposals and build their own business development over a period of years with a lot of success. And before I came to the coordinating board, I was working with the Comptroller of Public Accounts with the State Energy Conservation Office. We wrote proposals to the Department of Energy and were successful in bringing $280 million of stimulus funds to the state of Texas. Those awards are going out to cities, counties, and state agencies to fund alternative fuels, building retrofits, energy assurance, smart grid technologies, and so forth. So a lot of good stuff there. And that experience then, I was able to bring that to the coordinating board and help launch the program here. I have a certification in grants management and a master's degree in public administration from the University of North Texas. So thank you.
And welcome aboard, and thank you in advance for all the work that lies ahead. Appreciate it.
The one change that I would quickly like to mention is when we were assigned the responsibility of administering the state general services funds, well, before we were assigned that, the Office of the Inspector General of the Department of Education had already begun an audit of the state of Texas to determine the capability and the readiness to administer federal funds. And so that audit was in progress and almost completed even before we came into the picture, at least into the picture as we are now. We knew that we were going to administer $80 million, but before we came into the picture for the whole $723 million. The Office of Inspector General from the Department of Education issued that report this morning, and we will get it out as soon as we can to the board members. But in it, they recognize and they mentioned the fact that we came in, that the coordinating board came into the game late. They do say that we do need to strengthen and continue working to install or institute some of the processes at that time that they had found needed improvement. One of the things that they mentioned very prominently is the need for subrecipient monitoring, which this committee took action yesterday to approve a RFP for us to really get on top of that. So all in all, I think that once they come back to do the follow-up audit, we will be able to answer their, or to demonstrate that those things that they have mentioned could use improvement would definitely have been improved by the time they come back. So, and they do, like I said, they do acknowledge the fact that we were not part of the players at the time that they were doing the audit. And they finished it after we came into the picture. So we'll get that report out as soon as we can. I think it just came in this morning. So that is the latest change. I'm sure that since I left my computer, there's some others, but I'll let you know when I get back to my computer.
Thank you for the update, Dr. Alonso. Are there any questions for either Mr. Griffiths or Dr. Alonso? There being none, Mr. Chairman, this concludes the Committee on Agency Operations section of the board agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We will now go into executive session as posted on the agenda pursuant to Texas Government Code Section 551.074. The time is 12:12. Thank you. 21. If there's no other business, could I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
So moved by Dr. Golden. Second by Mr. Heldenfels. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed by the same sign. We'll stand adjourned. Thank you.
Yay.
Okay, further United.